Isis Audio Books presents an unabridged recording of The Day of Second Chances, written by Julie Cohen, read by Gilly Bond. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Isis Publishing Limited. And we, who have always thought of happiness as rising, would feel the emotion that almost overwhelms us whenever a happy thing falls. Rainer Maria Rilke, 10th Elegy, translated by Stephen Mitchell. Chapter 1. Honor. The last stage of Honor Levinson's life began at the top of the stairs in her home in North London. The windows had been cleaned 2 days before by the young man who came every spring with his bucket and ladder. The sun shone through the glass, warming a stripe of carpet and wall, stroking against Honor's cheek as she passed through it on the way to the stairs, carrying a basket of laundry to be washed. She was thinking of the laundry she used to have to do. The weight of PE kits and trousers caked with mud at the knees, school uniforms and gardening clothes, shirts that needed ironing, knickers and pants and handkerchiefs. So many loads every week, one after the other, unrelenting, just for one child and one woman. Sometimes it had felt as if her home were festooned with dripping clothes. She had to negotiate a jungle of drying socks and tights just to get into the bath. For something that took up so much time and effort, washing clothes was underrepresented in literature. This afternoon, her basket contained 2 blouses, a vest, a skirt, and 3 pairs of knickers. None of them dirty, really. What did she do to make her clothes dirty these days? Those days of sweat and soil and spills were over. Now her basket was light as the sunshine in the side of her vision. Honor balanced the basket on her hip and put her hand on the banister. The wood was warm, too, from the sun. Downstairs on the ground floor, the phone rang. She stepped forward to go down the first stair, and she missed it. The shock wasn't that she was falling. It was that she had missed the step, that her body had forgotten the language of the house, how to do this thing she had done every day for most of the years of her life. Honor put out her hands to stop herself, but the banister slipped from her grip, and she hit the riser hard with her hip and kept falling, slithering down the wooden stairs on her back. "Stephen!" she cried to the empty air. No pain, not yet, just thuds as she slid down the rest of the stairs, with no one to catch her. The back of her head bounced off a step, and she saw stars. They were clearer than anything she had seen in a long time. She knew this feeling, as if she had played this out in her mind many times before, the last moment, familiar as a child or a lover. She came to rest at the bottom, splayed on the floor. The phone rang for the second time. 2 rings, Honor thought. It all happened in the space between 2 rings of the telephone. Now she felt it. Or some of it. The back of her head, her hip, her back, her bottom, her elbows. Impact rather than pain. Her head was resting on the last step. She lay in another pool of sunlight and dazzle. But she was alive. When she called out, she had been certain she wouldn't survive. Honor touched the back of her head. It was warm and wet, and her hand, when she saw it, was shaking and covered with blood. Seeing it, the pain came. "Stephen," she said again, and her voice came from someone else, someone old and weak. Honor sat up, ignoring the screaming from her back and hip, the pounding in her head. She sucked in a breath and, holding onto the banister, tried to pull herself up. She immediately fell back down, squealing aloud with pain from her hip. The phone rang for a 3rd time, or perhaps it was the 4th. Broken hip, Old woman living alone, what a cliché she was. All these years of struggling, and she was a cliché. Carefully, gasping, Honor turned herself so she was lying on her left side, the side where her hip wasn't broken. Using her arms and her left foot, pushing herself across the wooden floor, she crawled towards the phone. There was a telephone on each story of her house, one in her bedroom, one in the kitchen in the basement, and one here on the ground floor in the living room. Her mobile was upstairs in her bedroom. Honor crawled through the doorway, slipping on her wet hands, her weak foot, to the Persian rug. She rested for a moment there, the wool scratchy against her cheek. Blood dripped from the back of her head, down her face. Cold water to wash that out, she thought. And the phone rang again. For the 6th time? 10th? It had been ringing for as long as she could remember, and she still had a metre to crawl. She drew in a deep breath, tasting of dust and wool, and pushed herself forward once again. It was more difficult to cross the carpet. As soon as she was better, she was going to put this carpet in the nearest skip, bloodstain and all. The phone was on a low table by the sofa. She wriggled the last few inches, using her shoulder to propel herself forward. Honor hooked her arm around the table leg, pulled as hard as she could, and the table toppled over. Thank God for flimsy furniture. Luckily, the phone landed beside her, the receiver off its cradle. She snatched for it with her good hand. "Hello," she said. "Hello, I need help." A pause. Her hair had come loose and was hanging in her face, dark with blood. She could feel sweat on her upper lip. It had been some time since she had last sweated. "Yes, madame," said a voice on the line at last, heavily accented. "Good day. This is Edward from Computer Access Services. I am calling about trouble with your Windows computer." "Piss off," she told him clearly, and pushed the button to hang up the phone. She dialed 999. "I require an ambulance," she told the operator, and waited the million hours until she was put through. "Ambulance service, what's the nature and location of the emergency, please?" "I've fallen down the stairs, and I have broken my hip, and I am bleeding from my head." She gave the calm-sounding woman her address. "All right, ma'am, I've alerted the dispatcher, and I'm going to stay on the line now and try to help you while you're waiting. You say you've hit your head and broken your hip. Are you having any difficulty breathing?" "That's about the only thing I'm not having difficulty doing." "Good girl. Don't patronise me. I'm old enough to be your grandmother." "My name is Honor." "Yes, Honor," said the dispatcher, a hint of humour in her voice. "If you don't mind me saying, you're telling me off is a good sign. Is there anyone with you?" "I'm alone." "Is your head still bleeding?" "Yes." "OK, Honor. Is there anything you can use to press against it and stop the bleeding?" She groped upward. A cushion, squashed nearly flat from use, lay near the edge of the sofa. Honor pulled it off. She pressed the cushion against the back of her head, gritting her teeth at the stab of pain. She held the phone to her ear with her other hand. It was slippery with blood. "I've done it," she said to the woman on the other end of the line. "That's good to hear." She sounded young and chirpy, like Jo. Honor closed her eyes and pictured wavy hair, a pink-lipped smile. "Honor, are you still with us?" She shook her head, trying to clear it. Still with us. Another cliché. Trying to make this whole incident sound inclusive, when she was more alone than she had ever been before. "I can't walk to the door to let the paramedics in, but there is a key under the blue plant pot holding a geranium." There was a buzz in her ears. Blackness grew from the centre of her world. "I'm going to pass out now, so I hope they come quickly." She's at the top of the stairs. Noise from the party swelling around her. She leans on the banister and sees the top of a man's head below her. He has dark hair, glossy and thick, and is wearing a brown tweed suit. He is taller than the people standing around him. He holds a drink in one hand, whiskey, and the other one is resting on the newel post of the banister, on the round ball that crowns it. His hand is slender. Even from here she can see the nails are clean, cut short. He wears a watch with a thick black leather strap. Every detail so clear, sharp. "What's his name?" she asks Sissy, standing next to her. "What, you haven't met him yet?" "That's Paul." Sissy turns to someone else, and Honor keeps on looking. There are people around him, but he is alone. Somewhere someone laughs loudly, and instead of looking for the source, he turns his head and looks up, straight into Honor's eyes. For the first time, she feels as if she is falling. "Hello, love, can you hear me?" Honor opened her eyes, tilted her head. A blur above her. Two blurs, wearing green and yellow. "Paul?" "No, my name's Derek. This is Sanjay, and we're paramedics. Can you squeeze my hand for me? Fell down the stairs, did we?" "I fell down the stairs. I don't know about you." Her mouth was dry. How much blood? How much time? One of the paramedics was messing about with her head, with any luck stopping the bleeding. She heard the rip of packets opening, the rustle of bandages. She tried to struggle up, get some of her dignity back. She'd called him Paul. How embarrassing. "What's your name, love?" "Honor Levinson." "Can you tell me what day it is, Mrs. Levinson?" "Tuesday the 11th of April. You shall have to ask me something more difficult than that." Her voice was raspy and hard. "I'll get these questions out of the way, and then I'll start with the pointless question, shall I? Are you taking any medication?" "I'm 80 years old. Of course I'm taking medication. It's in the bathroom cabinet." "Blood pressure 80/50, Sanjay. Are you feeling dizzy, Mrs. Levinson?" "Yes." "Are you alone here?" "Do you think I would have left my underwear on the stairs otherwise?" She closed her eyes and gritted her teeth as the paramedics shifted her, placed a restraint on her head to stabilise it. "She must have pulled herself all the way from the bottom of the stairs to the phone," said one of the medics. "Pretty impressive." "Morphine?" she gasped. "Don't worry, we've got gas and air in the ambulance, and we'll have you to hospital in a tick. Do you have anyone you'd like us to ring for you, Mrs. Levinson?" "Doctor Levinson." "Is that your husband?" "No, it bloody is not. It's me. I don't have anyone to call." They lifted her, more delicately than she could have thought possible, onto the stretcher and out through the door where the ambulance was waiting. Honor kept her eyes closed, unwilling to see the pedestrians who would be pausing to gape at the helpless old lady carried out of her home, frail as a bundle of twigs. Once she'd known all these people, everyone in the houses all around. The outside air cooled the tears on her cheeks. "No one," she whispered, as they slid her safely into the back of the ambulance, and she repeated their names in her head like a song, the names of no one. Paul and Stephen. Stephen and Paul. Chapter 2. Joe. "Hey, man, wait for me!" The teenager pushed past Joe, who was pressing all her weight down on the back of the pushchair so the front of it would lift up onto the bus. He flashed his pass and was up the stairs, yelling to his mates, before she could say anything. He was in a hurry, Joe said to Oscar, sucking his thumb beside her. Iris yelled out, "No!" and threw her beaker out of the pushchair. It landed in the space between the bus and the curb and rolled out of sight. "Oh, God. Sorry, but hold on to the pushchair, Oscar. Step up. That's right, stay there." She shoved the pushchair up into the bus and dropped to her hands and knees outside. The person behind her in the queue tutted. "I'll just be a minute," she called cheerfully, reaching under the bus. The beaker had rolled almost all the way to the front wheel. She retrieved it and stood up, red-faced, her hair escaping from its clip, Just another 40-year-old mother getting in everyone's way.
Mummy, the bus is going to go without you.
Oscar's forehead was wrinkled, his eyes panicked, ready to cry. No, sweetie, it's fine. Jo scrambled up into the bus, bumping against the shopping bags hanging from the handles of her pushchair. She wiped dirt from the beaker with her skirt and gave it to Iris. Hold on to that now, darling. Sorry, she said to the bus driver and the people behind her, and everyone. My purse is... It was on the pushchair, wedged into the folded canopy. She found it and unzipped the top. Sorry, I've only got a £5 note. No change, said the bus driver. Jo looked back at the other people behind her in the queue. Some gazed back blankly, some averted their eyes. OK, she said, just take it. It's still less expensive than paying for parking. She pushed it under the glass barrier with a self-conscious laugh.
Can we sit upstairs, Mummy? In the front seat?
Oscar pulled at her jacket. Not with a pushchair, sweetheart. Go ahead and find a seat. I'll park Iris. There was only one seat, near the back. Oscar scampered to it, while Jo manoeuvred the pushchair to the space near the front. Thankfully, there were no other pushchairs this time. A woman in an overcoat buttoned up to her neck was in the fold-out priority seat, and she gave Jo's loaded pushchair a dirty look. Sorry, said Jo, we've done rather a lot of shopping. She glanced from Iris, strapped in, to Oscar in the back, alone.
Mummy!
He yelled. You forgot your ticket, called the bus driver. Jo went back for it. As she took it, her phone rang in her pocket. She shoved the ticket in her pocket along with her ringing phone and returned to Iris. The little girl grinned, holding out her hands to her mother. Chocolate stained all round her mouth, even though Jo had wiped it with a napkin after they'd been to the cafe. It always came back. How? I'll just get you out, sweetheart, she said, smiling down at her daughter, and the bus pulled away with a lurch. She caught herself on the post and heard Oscar calling for her, the beginning of panic in his voice.
Osky,
Iris told her. Just a minute. She unbuckled Iris, the little girl's sticky hands going round her neck, into her hair, sweet breath on her cheek. The pushchair, without the weight of Iris to keep it steady, tipped backwards under the weight of the shopping. Jo righted it with one arm, the other around her daughter. The woman in the priority seat sighed. Have you forgotten what it's like to have children, you old bat? Jo thought. But instead she smiled and said, sorry, and carried Iris up the aisle to where her brother was sitting. She passed another group of teenagers in their school uniforms, earphones in, talking loudly to each other, long legs sprawled over seats they had no intention of giving up. In her pocket, the phone stopped ringing. She picked up Oscar with her other arm, settled both children on her lap, though Oscar was hanging half off, trying to peer out of the window past the man sitting next to him. The pushchair fell over again. The woman gave it an even filthier look and moved her handbag conspicuously 6 inches to the right. I will tell this story to Sarah tomorrow, Jo thought, and we'll laugh.
Mummy!
Oscar squirmed on her.
I'm hungry.
It's not far now, sweetheart. And you just had a muffin at the cafe.
I'm really hungry.
Jo snaked her arm round so she could reach into her other pocket, the one with her keys instead of her phone, and found a small plastic container. Cheerios, she said, producing it, grateful that there was something in it other than a used wet wipe. She packed these small pots every morning, hiding them in various places, to be apparated like a bunny in a magician's hat at vital moments when distraction was needed. Sometimes she forgot. Sometimes she found pots she'd left there days before.
No,
said Iris, and filled her chubby hand with the cereal. Little O's dropped onto Jo's lap, onto the seat and the floor. The man sitting next to the window stared straight ahead. Save some for your brother, Jo said.
I don't like Cheerios. What does this button do?
Oscar pressed the big red button on the post in front of him. It dinged. Delighted, he pressed it again. 10 minutes till we get home, said Jo. though it would be more like 20 until they passed out of the cramped streets of Brickham town centre and into the broader leafy suburb. And then a walk through the park and down the street before they reached their house. Under her jacket, her armpits were damp, and her hair was bound to be a mess. "Not far now. Do you want to sing a song?"
"The wheels on the bus,"
sang Iris through wet Cheerios. "If you don't stop that bloody kid pressing that bloody button, I'm going to stop this bloody bus right now." The driver's voice came via a microphone and blared through the bus. The teenagers laughed. "Sorry," said Jo, her words lost, catching Oscar's hand and holding it. He struggled to free himself. "You can't press the button, Oscar. The man asked you not to."
"That man is rude,"
said Oscar. "Oscar loves riding on the bus," Jo said to the man sitting next to them. "And he loves pressing buttons. Any button at all. He keeps on changing the television settings. I'm hoping he's going to be a computer programmer or an engineer." The man grunted and continued to look out of the window. They passed by the end of Jo's old street, the one she'd used to live in with Stephen and Lydia. If she craned her head, she could see the brick front of their old house. And then up the hill, down the road, trundling into the suburbs, stopping to let more people on and off with a hiss and a sigh.
"I'm really hungry, Mummy,"
said Oscar.
"And I'm bored."
"Do you want to play with my phone?" Oscar nodded vehemently, and Jo let his hands go to reach in her pocket for it. "Oh, I missed that call. Do you think it was Lydia?"
"No,"
agreed Iris, bouncing up and down on Jo's lap and reaching for the phone too. Iris loved talking to her big sister on the telephone. Jo held it up, squinting at the missed call number on the screen. A London code. Unfamiliar number. Message left. "Just a second, sweetheart. I need to listen to this first." Unease twiddled in her belly as she dialed the voicemail number. "Hello, Mrs. Merrifield. This is Ilse Kwong at the Homerton University Hospital. I wonder if you could return my call as soon as possible on this number. Thank you." "It's Lydia. It's Lydia. Taken the train into London, hit by a bus. Hit by a car, assaulted by strangers. Why didn't she call me herself? Why did she go without telling me, my little girl? Oh, Stephen."
"Mummy, I want to play Angry Birds."
"Just a second, Oscar," she said, disconnecting from voicemail. "Mummy has to make a quick phone call." It couldn't be Lydia. Why would it be Lydia? School had only just finished for the day. Lydia would be walking home with Avril, pausing in the park to hang out and trade banter with the boys. But not too much, because she had to study. Jo was being silly, being a crazy mother hen. Still, she checked her phone to make sure there were no missed calls or messages from Liddy.
"But I want to play Angry Birds."
"As soon as I return this call, sweetie." Her fingers were shaking as she dialed. She squeezed Iris to her, smelling chocolate and child, remembering Lydia at that age, not quite 2, sticky and precious. The phone rang several times before it was answered, long enough for Jo to run through the entire scenario in her head. Lydia stepping off the curb, in front of a bus, in hospital in a coma. Thomas Audley Ward, Ilse Kwong speaking. "Oh, hello," Jo said into the phone, falsely bright, feeling the man next to them twisting with irritation in his seat. "This is Joanne Merrifield. I'm just returning your call." "Joanne Merrifield? Joanne Merrifield. Just a moment. Let me find my notes." Jo gripped the phone and held her youngest daughter tighter.
"Mummy! Owie!"
whined Iris. "Why do people feel they have to use their mobile phones on public transport?" said the person sitting in front of Jo, one of the people who hadn't offered her and her 2 young children a seat.
"As if we all want to hear what they have to say."
"You just rang me 5 minutes ago," prompted Jo. For the first time thinking of Richard, driving too fast, talking on his phone in traffic. But they wouldn't ring her if Richard was hurt. "Oh, yes, here we are. Mrs. Merrifield, we have your mother here. Admitted earlier this afternoon." "My mother? My mother is—" "Oh, do you mean Honor?" "Honor Levinson, that's right. She had a fall at home. She gave us your number to ring as her next of kin." "I'm her daughter-in-law." Jo sagged in her seat with relief. Of course it was Honor. "Is she all right?" "She's been admitted, and she will probably need to stay in for several days, but she's stable. She's resting comfortably." "Good. She'll need... I'll..." Jo paused, thinking ahead, planning, as she always seemed to be doing. Her mind reshuffled circumstances and responsibilities.
"Hungry, Mummy!"
Oscar was squished up against her, plucking at her sleeve. They weren't at their stop yet, but they were close enough to get off the bus and walk. Jo punched the red button.
"I want to press!"
Iris cried in her ear. The nurse, or whoever she was at the end of the phone, was silent. Jo pictured her rolling her eyes, writing on paperwork, multitasking. She held Iris up so she could press the button, which she did with a little shout of glee. "You press it too, Oscar, it's okay," she whispered, then said into the phone, "I'm so sorry, I'm on a bus with my children and we're at our stop. Thank you for ringing. Please tell Honor I'll be in to see her today as soon as I can get there." As she ended the call, Oscar was pressing the red button over and over. "OK, time to go, sweetie." Oscar hopped off her lap and trotted to the front of the bus, his ginger head bobbing. Jo carried Iris after him. The bus braked just as she leaned over to pick up the toppled pushchair, and she staggered, banging her hip against the luggage rack. "Just a minute," she called, and for speed's sake wheeled the pushchair towards the bus door without strapping Iris into it.
"Thank you,"
Oscar trilled to the driver as he opened the door.
"Thank you,"
Iris trilled, being carried past. Jo thought this was more than sufficient, actually. She shoved the pushchair out onto the pavement, took Oscar's hand, and stepped off the bus, balancing Iris on her hip. The bus hissed at her and moved off, almost before they'd fully disembarked. The pushchair fell over backwards. "Next time we are taking the car," said Jo, heaving it upright yet again, and settling Iris more securely on her hip. "There are adventures, and then there are adventures. Shall we run?" Oscar squealed and scampered off down the broad pavement lined by neat gardens towards the park. Jo ran after him, steering the pushchair with one hand. Liddy would be home already, or in a minute, or maybe she'd see her in the park, and Jo could settle the children and take something out of the freezer, iron Liddy's uniform for tomorrow quickly, put away the shopping, brush her hair and teeth, and jump into the car. With any luck, she could be on a train to London before 5 o'clock. It would be rush hour on the tube. Would it be better to drive? What would the North Circular be like? Her mind went to Honor as they ran. A fall. She couldn't picture Honor ever falling. She could only picture Honor standing straight. Chapter 3. Lydia. It started with yogurt. Does that sound dramatic? Or dumb? The How to Write book I'm reading says that you should open your stories with a dramatic line, something to pull the reader in. The problem is, of course, what sort of dramatic line do you choose when nothing really dramatic happens to you ever? Just a series of little events that cause way more worry than you would think if you observe them from the outside. Well, there was the one dramatic thing that happened to Dad, but I wasn't there. Anyway, it did start with yogurt, so that's how I'll begin my story. I was in the lunch queue, trying to decide between a strawberry and an apricot yogurt. Apricot is vile, but it was low-fat, and the strawberry was full-fat. Personally, I do not give a flying monkey about whether a yogurt is low-fat or not, but Avril is doing this thing where you check the package of everything you eat for how many grams of fat and sugar and carbs it has, and then you enter it into some app on your phone. Erin and Sophie and Olivia are doing it because they're the eating disorder girls. And for some reason, Avril has taken it up too, because of some imaginary cellulite on her thighs. It won't last. She can't resist Maltesers. But right now, they're obsessed, and I knew that if I came back to the table with a full-fat yogurt, after eating my entire packed lunch, they would all watch every mouthful I took, imagining it appearing directly on my hips. Not that I care about what the bulimia buddies think. I eat when I'm hungry like a normal person. But Avril. So I reached for the apricot. "Hey, Lezzer, move your fat ass." It was Darren Raymond, standing ahead of me in the queue. I recognised the spots on the back of his neck, which are my pleasant view every maths lesson. He was talking to someone standing in front of the service area. Tall, lumpy, holding her empty tray in front of her. That new girl, the one with the funny name. "Yeah, get moving, you're holding up the whole queue," said another boy. "Some of us are hungry for something other than pussy." The queue erupted into laughter. The new girl's face was bright red. Her eyes were searching for a grown-up, someone to say something, to tell the boys off for swearing, but the dinner ladies had disappeared. I'm waiting for my lunch," she stammered. It's a special lunch, gluten-free." "It's a special lunch, gluten-free," mocked one of the boys. I couldn't see which one. But I could see the girl's hands on her tray, white-knuckled and shaking. I didn't know her name, but anyone could see how she felt. "I'm pussy-flavoured," said Darren, the wit. "Oh, grow up," I called at him. "You're never going to know what pussy tastes like, Darren, except in your dreams." Roaring laughter. Darren Raymond's spotty neck went pink. On the other side of the service hatch, a dinner lady showed up with a single plate of food, looking around, half smiling, to try to discover what the joke was about. I squeezed up the side of the queue and went to pay for my yoghurt. And, just for the record, £1.40 is way too much for a small pot of fruit-flavoured bacteria. At the table, Avril was folding her napkin into a little crane. She perched it on my palm when I sat next to her. It was so light it barely weighed anything. Something about the tilt of its head reminded me of her. "That's your best yet," I told her. "It's for you. A little gift to celebrate your return." "Why, thank you, darling." We traded a complicit look. It's you and me against all the rest of these idiots. Darling. Erin was twisting a plastic straw into a gnarled shape. "I have no idea how you eat so much and stay so slim, Liz." "Witchcraft," I said, peeling the top of my yoghurt. Though Erin didn't mean it as a question. It doesn't take a genius to know that I can eat a lot and stay slim because I run about 1,000,000 miles every week. She just wanted to make me feel self-conscious, because that's the way she'd feel if she ate anything more than a single apple at lunchtime. As if we didn't all know that she ate her own body weight in Doritos every evening before chucking it all up in the toilet. Anyway, I was taking the top of my yoghurt off and dipping my plastic spoon into it, because they don't trust us with proper cutlery. Mr. Graham is always banging on about ecology. He should have a word with the school meals service and their plastic everything. When I noticed there was someone standing next to me. It was that new girl, whatever her name was. Something beginning with B. Her tray had a plate with some orangish mess on it. Her cheeks were still flushed red. Or maybe that was the way she always looked. Her hair was short, but it flopped into her eyes because her fringe was long. I just wanted to say," said the new girl. Thank you." All of the other girls at the table were looking at us. I could actually feel them counting the seats, making a calculation. 5 chairs filled with people, 1 heaped with books and pencil cases and jumpers. The new girl's parting was pale against her dark hair. Her jumper was too new, and her skirt was too long, above white folded ankle socks. I shrugged. The boys were being stupid, and I wanted to get my lunch. The new girl nodded and paused for a moment, as if she were considering asking us to move the jumpers so she could sit down. But then she carried on walking. She found an empty table at the far end of the room. "What happened?" Avril asked. "Why was she thanking you?" I told them about it. Avril laughed, and the other girls giggled and glanced at Darren Raymond and his table, who were all throwing bits of bread roll at each other. Darren is a straight-up geek, maths and computer nerd, and spotty to boot. The type of person who needs someone to pick on to hide how socially inadequate they really are. "God, they are so ignorant," said Erin, sighing elaborately. anyone can see that she's not gay. Really, I said, licking yoghurt off my spoon. I couldn't really taste it. How can you tell? She doesn't look anything like Georgie and Whitney. I'm not really an expert, but I don't think that all gay girls look exactly like each other, said Avril. It's a weird name, though, said Sophie. It's a boy's name. And that haircut, said Olivia. She could do with some makeup. And losing a couple of stone. Just because she's ugly doesn't mean she's a lesbo, said Erin. Georgie and Whitney aren't ugly. Well, Whitney isn't. Oh, you fancy Whitney, tittered Sophie. Shut up. I would hate to be called a lesbo, said Avril. I'm still hungry, Lids. Can I have some of your yoghurt? I slid the container over to her. Have the rest of it. I'm not hungry anymore. I picked up the paper crane she had made. The new girl sat alone, eating her gloppy lunch. I didn't look in her direction, but I knew she was there. I could feel her. And I've kept on thinking about her for the rest of today, which is why I'm writing about her now. It was a stupid thing to do. I forged a connection between us, and now I'm going to notice her everywhere, when up till now I've been blissfully ignorant. I'm going to notice how the new girl doesn't have any friends, how her white socks look nearly the same colour as her legs, how people whisper and turn their backs. I'm going to notice the sniggers when teachers say her weird boy name. Which isn't even that weird, it turns out. Someone told me after. Her name is Bailey. Girls have boys' names all the time. Nobody picks on Tyler or Billy. If the new girl were cooler, she could totally pull it off. But she's not. She lugs that name around with her like she lugs her extra weight. A makeup-free face, a gluten-free lunch. And those little girls' socks. God, if you could just tell these people. Blend in. Watch and copy. It's so much easier. People are looking at you all the time. They're making up their minds about you. It's better to decide yourself what they're going to see. But you can't say that. Not to someone who doesn't know it instinctively. Not to someone with no sense of self-preservation. I sat at that lunch table today, twirling the crane in my hand, feeling Avril beside me eating from my spoon, feeling the others surrounding me with their chatter and security. A bubble, as fragile as a paper crane. I stroked my finger against the crane's wings, slowly, one carefully folded wing, then the other, watching them bend under my touch. I still have it. It's sitting on my desk right now, looking at me. Does that sound dramatic? Or dumb? Go on, Lids, give us a picture, said Harry Carter. He was lounging against the wall as if he were posing for the cover of a boy band album. Lydia would have kept on walking, but the corridor was narrower there, and she had to slow down because of the Harry Carter effect on passing traffic. She stopped and struck a pose. Sure, take one now, she said. He pouted. You know, that's not the kind of picture I mean. Oh, hi, Harry, said Avril. I know exactly what kind of picture you mean, Lydia told him. Do I look like the stupid kind of girl who would give you a picture to share on the internet with all of your pathetic friends? Harry's smile got wider. He had very white teeth, straight and even like a pop star's, and a dimple that half of the upper school were desperate to touch. Sophie had written his name at least 1,000 times in the back of her notebook. I heard what you said at lunchtime, he said. You told Darren Raymond all about your pussy. What I said was that he wouldn't get near mine or anyone else's in 1,000 years. I think you're hot. Think all you like. Thinking is free. Blend in, watch and copy. Although in this case Lydia was mostly copying from television, because nobody knocked back Harry Carter in real life. He leaned forward and whispered, Take one in the bathroom after school and text it to me. I won't share it with anyone else, promise. In your dreams, she said, and winked at him before turning away. Just like Darren Raymond, yelled Harry after them, turning to his friends and laughing. She linked her arm with Avril's. "Come on, or we'll be late and we won't get to sit together." "Will you?" Avril asked as they reached the English block. "Will I what?" "Send Harry a picture." "God, why would I do something like that?" They reached the classroom early enough for there still to be seats together at the back. "He's fit," said Avril. "And I think he likes you. Not my type." "He might send you a picture back." "Bleh!" "Do you really not like him?" "Oh, do you have a pencil?" Lydia gave Avril a pencil. "Why are you going on about Harry? You don't like him, do you?" "No, I wasn't saying I liked Harry. I was wondering about him for you, because I thought you liked Zane." Avril shrugged. "He's a little, I don't know, boring." "How do you know he's boring? He never says anything." Zane was, in fact, way too thick for Avril. He was totally safe. "We Facebooked last night," said Avril. "Zane can type? That's a surprise." "He can't spell." Lydia laughed in relief. "You need a speller?" "I just want someone who has something to say, you know? Like Harry." "I wasn't saying that." "How bad was his spelling?" Avril took her phone out of her bag to show her. Lydia hung over her desk. "Miss Toller, Miss Levinson," said Miss Drayton, walking into the room, and Lydia instantly launched herself back into her seat. "Is that your phone, Avril? Could I trouble you to turn it off and hand it to me for the duration of the lesson? We only have a few weeks until your exams, and I would like all of your attention, please. Then get out your copy of Far from the Madding Crowd and read to us from page 115. Start from the beginning of the chapter." Avril shot Lydia a wry look and gave her phone into Miss Drayton's hand. She dug out her dog-eared, annotated paperback copy of the novel as Miss Drayton placed her confiscated booty on the top of her desk, a reminder to anyone else who might think of texting or tweeting during English. "The hollow amid the ferns," she began. Lydia put her finger in her paperback to hold the place, and she watched Avril. When you spent most of your time with someone, you hardly ever got to really look at them. You were too busy looking at other things together. Even when you were talking to each other, you never actually stared at someone. You only glanced away, looked at other things. Looking at her now was like a stolen square of chocolate, melting over Lydia's tongue in the secrecy of her closed mouth. Avril had rich, dark hair, almost brown enough to be black, straightened today and spilling over her shoulders. She always tucked it behind her ears. Her fingernails were bitten short. She wore a tiny silver shell ring that Lydia brought back for her from Naxos when she'd gone on holiday there, before Mum and Richard had split up. Her lashes were long and darker than her hair. There was a mole on her cheekbone, and freckles that came out with the sunshine. There were 2 holes in each of her earlobes. Avril's mother hadn't discovered the second one yet. They matched the holes in Lydia's ears. They'd had them done over half-term. The piercing gun got stuck in Avril's left ear and the hole bled. They went to McDonald's afterwards, and Lydia held a cube of ice from her Coke against Avril's small, intentional wound. The melting ice ran down her bare arm, and Avril wiped it off with her finger. "He had kissed her," read Avril. Clearly and not loudly, but in a voice that carried. Avril's voice always carried. She used to stand in front of their class in Year 7 and read her book reports. Back in those days when she wore her hair in plaits, and Lydia asked Mum to do her hair the same way, though Lydia's always slipped out and got ragged. They used to wear identical Mary Jane shoes. Even then, when Avril would read, Lydia would close her eyes to listen to the sound. They had made each other who they were. Avril's hair, Lydia's laugh, Lydia's holiday, Avril's finger. They bought the same clothes at the same time, though the items looked different on each of them. Their histories were written on each other's bodies. That would never change. Lydia Levinson? Laughter brought her back to the present. She was at her desk in the back of Miss Drayton's room, and everyone in the room had turned around to stare at her. I know that Avril's very pretty, said Miss Drayton, but it's your turn to read now, please. Avril smiled. She rolled her eyes and twirled her finger around her ear. Someone sniggered. From the front of the room, Lydia heard the name Bailey. The blush that she hated raced up her neck. The next chapter? Particulars of a Twilight Walk, suggested Miss Drayton. Lydia flipped pages and, clearing her throat, she began to read. Chapter 4. Joe. Joe had CBeebies on the telly and a fish pie in the oven by the time Lydia came home, Avril beside her. Both girls had shirts untucked, school jumper sleeves rolled up, coltish legs bare between skirt and socks. As always, they were taller than she expected, their long hair shoved into sloppy ponytails. This past autumn, on the morning of the first day of school, Joe had suggested a brush. Lydia's hair was so lovely when it was brushed smooth, falling in shiny coppery waves around her face and down her back. She'd given up any hope of the brush when she'd seen Lydia's best friend at the door come to pick her up for school. Avril's hair was in a messy bun, and therefore Lydia's would have to be too. The two girls had dressed alike, talked alike, loved the same music and television shows from the moment they'd met. Lydia slammed the door, and Avril sniffed the air and said, "It smells great in here, Mrs. Merrifield." Joe looked up from the sink, where she was washing cherry tomatoes. "Fish pie. I made extra last week and froze it. You're welcome to stay for tea, Avril." "Can't," said Lydia, heading out of the kitchen. "I just came in to get changed, then I'm going out." Avril gave Joe an apologetic smile. "We're meeting some friends at Starbucks to revise. I hope that's okay?" "No, I have to—" "Lydia!" Lydia had started for her room, but she came back reluctantly. She leaned against the doorframe, ready to be gone again. "I've got to go into London to see your grandmother," said Joe, wiping her hands on a tea towel. "I need you to give Oscar and Iris their tea. I should be back by 9 or 10 at the latest." "I can't," said Lydia. "I've got plans. I'm sorry, but this is more important. It's schoolwork. We've got exams coming up." She recited it as if she were reading it off a sheet. "GCSEs can determine your entire future career, both academic and professional." "I know, and that's true, but Honor needs me, and it's urgent." "Why can't Oscar and Iris come with you?" "I told you I won't get back till after their bedtime. I can't drag them to London. Why don't you stay here and revise? There's plenty of fish pie, and Avril can stay here and have some too." "I arranged for us to meet Erin and Sophie at the cafe," Avril said. "They're waiting for me there. Sorry, Mrs. M." "What about Richard?" asked Lydia. "It's about time he looked after his own kids for a change." "Lydia!" Avril looked down at her shoes, but Lydia stared right at Joe. "I'm not calling Richard," said Joe, hearing the edge in her voice. "There's no time for him to get here anyway. I'm asking you, as a responsible near adult, to look after your brother and sister for one evening while I go to see your grandmother who needs me. And in fact, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to stay at home." "That is so unfair!" Lydia turned around and stormed across the kitchen. Joe heard the door of her room slam and sighed. "I've got to go. Sorry, Mrs. M. I hope Lydia's gran is okay." Avril slipped out. Joe counted to 10 and went to Lydia's bedroom. It was on the ground floor, across the short corridor near the front door that was always clogged with wellies and raincoats. She rapped on the door. There was no answer. So she said through the door, "I'm going to dish up tea before I go, but you'll have to sit with them, even if you don't want anything to eat yourself. And you'll have to clear up afterwards. Don't forget to brush their teeth." No reply. Joe tipped her head back and looked at the ceiling. "Honor has had a fall. She's in hospital. I'm going to bring her some things from home." A stirring behind the door, but no answer. "She's all right," added Joe, "in case you were wondering." She waited for several minutes, and then went to the kitchen to take the pie out of the cooker and spoon out 2 portions on plates to cool. Jo was about to call Lydia again when the girl came into the kitchen. She'd changed into low-slung tracksuit bottoms and a T-shirt that skimmed her flat stomach. She scraped a chair against the floor and sat down at the table. Jo opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again and went to fetch her handbag and car keys. She was still seething, still rehearsing what she should have said, the perfect words to make her teenage daughter collapse instantly into the correct contrition, when she walked through the glass doors into Homerton University Hospital reception. It wasn't until she entered the ward that the antiseptic smell of the hospital filtered through her awareness, and Jo closed her eyes and thought, Stephen. The telephone call. 10 years ago. 10 years ago, this June. The words from a stranger. Strapping Lydia, aged 6, in the back seat, where she immediately fell asleep. The drive to the hospital with her hands shaking on the wheel. Jo afraid she was going to crash, until the moment she turned off the ignition. Carrying her daughter into the hospital, long legs dangling, and holding her in the lift, on their way up to see Jo's husband, Lydia's father, where he lay in a bed with a machine breathing for him. The chemical smell of fear, and the little girl, asleep and trusting in her arms. The lift dinged, and Jo opened her eyes. Her flat, soft-soled boots made no sound on the polished tile floor. Outside, the light was fading, but inside the hospital it was bright midday. She pumped sanitizer on her hands and went through to the ward reception desk. "Hi, I'm here to see Honor Levinson," she said, and the nurse set off to show her the way. The ward was full of old people in beds. Some were asleep, some watching television. 1 or 2 had relatives sitting in plastic chairs. One man was lying on his side, rapidly texting into an iPhone. Honor was sleeping in a bed at the far end. Her head was wrapped in bandages. "My God," said Jo. "She really had a fall, didn't she?" "She's sleeping, bless her," said the nurse. "She's only been awake for a little while since I've been on shift, when I took her obs. Best thing for her. The bandages make it look worse than it is. She only has a few stitches on the back of her head. I'll see if I can get a doctor to speak with you." Left alone, Jo pulled a chair up to the side of Honor's bed and looked at her. She'd never seen her mother-in-law sleeping before. Awake and upright, Honor was slender and tall, but under the blanket she seemed nothing more than bones. Her skin was waxy, her cheeks sunken over her glorious cheekbones. Her mouth was half open, showing fillings in her teeth. She had a line going into her right arm. Her breathing was soft but audible. Jo couldn't believe Honor had named her as next of kin. Honor would never want Jo, of all people, to see her this way. She looked old. Her long silver hair was untidy. Not unlike Lydia's style, thought Jo, and she reached over to neaten it when a voice said, "Hello, I'm Dr. Mukta." Jo straightened up almost guiltily and shook the doctor's hand. He looked incredibly young, smooth-cheeked, as if he hadn't yet started shaving. Was that a sign of getting older when the doctors looked like children? "I'm Honor's daughter-in-law," she explained. "I came as soon as I heard she'd had a fall, as quickly as I could." "Yes, a fall at home. Down the stairs, I think. Concussion and a head wound. The most serious injury was her hip." "She broke her hip?" "Yes, she's had surgery this afternoon to repair it. Luckily we were able to operate quickly. There's some osteoporosis, which isn't uncommon at her age, of course. But from all accounts it was quite a fall." "She must have been terrified," Jo said. "Well, it says on her notes that Mrs. Levinson was Dr. Levinson. She's got a PhD. Maybe 2. She gets ever so cross if she's called Mrs." "Is that so?" said the doctor politely. "Well, Dr. Levinson was conscious when she was admitted. She rang 999 herself, but she was confused." "I can't imagine Honor confused." "She was in a great deal of pain. And there was the concussion. We've been monitoring her carefully. At her age, a broken hip is no laughing matter. Does she live by herself? Yes. Well, we'll be keeping her in for several days while she recovers from the surgery, and she'll need to talk with an occupational therapist to make some plan for her care when she gets out of hospital. She'll have to have physiotherapy to restore as much mobility as possible. And she's going to require a lot of help with day-to-day living. Of course, we'll sort something out. Jo looked back down at Honor. Poor Honor, she thought, and was instantly surprised that she could ever think such a thing of her mother-in-law. She was certain that her mother-in-law had never thought such a thing of her. Honor's home was a tall, narrow brick house in Stoke Newington, raised from the pavement by a flight of stone stairs, which were slippery after the light falling rain. The key to the front door had been with the few belongings that had been taken with Honor into hospital. Jo let herself in and wiped her feet on the doormat, looking around. It felt empty, inhabited by silence and the papery smell of books and dust. Jo turned on the light and saw the blood on the floor. It was a trail, crossing the hallway from the bottom of the stairs to the lounge. There was a larger patch of it near the stairs, where a laundry basket lay upside down. "Oh, Honor," Jo said. She stepped over it and went down to the kitchen to get a cloth. The teapot sat near the kettle. A tea towel was discarded on the table next to an open-spined book, but that was the only clutter, a huge contrast to the way Jo had left her own kitchen. She found paper towels and cleaning spray, rags under the sink and some carpet cleaner, and brought them upstairs. Jo took a moment before she began cleaning, regarding the blood warily. Was it going to make her sick? She wasn't good with bodily fluids, with vomit, or wee, or blood. She gagged changing Iris's nappy sometimes, still. In the end, she got down on her knees and sprayed the fluid on the stains. The scent of fake lemons covered up any smell that the blood might have had, and the stains on the floorboards came up easily enough with the spray. It was surprisingly bright red on the paper towels. It looked as though Honor had lost quite a bit of blood. Jo's stomach hitched, and she put the back of her hand to her mouth, thinking of lemons, round and yellow, sharp and dimpled and fresh. Lemons on trees, growing. She swallowed and bent back to her task. The floor itself wasn't all that clean. Dust and dirt came up with the blood. There were dust bunnies near the skirting boards. Jo worked her way across towards the stairs and nudged the laundry basket out of the way. There was something small and white, crumpled underneath. Jo picked it up. A pair of knickers. She gazed up the staircase and saw another pair, and a vest, and some other things. Honor Levinson would never leave her knickers in public view. The sight of these, lying where they'd fallen, was somehow more horrible than the sight of Honor's blood. Jo stood and quickly gathered the clothes together, putting them in the righted basket. She couldn't tell if they were clean or dirty, and she wasn't about to inspect them closely to find out. She'd take them home to wash them. She had to stop again and put her hand to her mouth when she went into the lounge and turned on the light. It was like something out of a horror film. There was blood on the carpet here, and a large dark stain near the sagging chintz sofa. A table was overturned, and the phone lay beside it. Jo righted the table, wiped blood from the phone, checked for messages. None. Jo attacked the rug with carpet cleaning spray and wet rags, and managed to get most of the blood out, but there was still a brown stain in the Persian weave. She double-checked the room to make sure she hadn't missed any spots of blood, keeping her gaze trained carefully on the floor, knowing the danger in looking too carefully at the photographs on the wall. Once she was satisfied, she carried the cleaning stuff downstairs, her arms aching from the scrubbing, and threw all the rags and the paper towels in the bin. Then she washed her hands and arms with washing-up liquid, and, sighing, put on the kettle for a cup of tea. She hadn't had anything since the coffee in the cafe with the children this afternoon. She'd never made so much as a cup of tea in this kitchen. In the many years she'd known Honor, she'd never been allowed to. So she had to look around a bit to find the canister. She noticed, as she did, that the kitchen was tidy but rather dirty. There were cup rings on the counter, breadcrumbs near the toaster. The cabinet doors had splashes of tea and a few fingerprints on them. The white top of the cooker was splattered with nearly invisible grease. This was not how she remembered Honor's kitchen. The house, every inch of it, had always been scrupulously clean. Books dusted, candlesticks polished, mirrors clear. So much so that Jo had always gone into a frenzy of cleaning of her own house before Honor's visits. Stephen had thought she was being ridiculous. "My mother doesn't care whether you dust underneath the refrigerator," he'd told her. But Jo was certain that she did. She knew Honor's high standards. She knew she was wanting in Honor's eyes. In the end, Stephen had always taken a duster and joined in. Honor had taught him how to clean, after all, and he was good at it. He had a scientist's methodical mind. He'd moved furniture, reorganised kitchen cabinets, reached on top of wardrobes. He'd given little Lydia her own toy broom so she could help when Granny came. Jo's second husband, Richard, had thought it was funny. He laughed at her and went back to watching the football while she hoovered around him with Oscar and then the next year Iris strapped to her body in a baby sling. "She's not even your mother-in-law anymore. Who cares what she thinks?" he'd say. "You don't work so hard to please my mum." That was because Richard's mum, Frances, had a cleaner and never lifted a finger to wipe or polish, whereas Honor did everything. In between reading every book that had ever been written, writing articles, picking apart theories and arguments. Honor cleaned and polished that entire tall house, filled with the furniture her parents had bought, listening to Tchaikovsky. And that was why Jo had refused when Richard had said he'd hire a cleaner, although Honor's visits were few and far between. She wished she'd put up more of a fight against hiring an au pair. When was the last time Jo had seen Honor? She'd sent a card at Mother's Day. Had it been Christmas? Christmas. Or rather the week before Christmas, when Lydia's school had finished for the holiday. When Jo had bundled Lydia and Oscar and Iris into the car and paid the congestion charge and driven into London so that she could spend 2 hours trying to keep her small children's sticky hands off the books, explaining to Oscar that Granny Honor didn't have a Christmas tree because she was Jewish, stumbling over the explanation as Honor sat straight-backed, watching her as if waiting for her to make a mistake. They had gone as soon as they could leave, obligation honoured. So, nearly 4 months ago. It wasn't good enough. Honor was Lydia's only living relative. Except for distant great-aunts on Jo's side of the family, Jo should have made more of an effort. Jo drank her tea quickly, scalding hot. The milk was near its use-by date. Jo poured it down the sink and threw a tub of coleslaw and a bag of salad in the bin. There were eggs and yogurts and bananas with a few days left in them, and a small block of cheese, which she put in a plastic bag to take home along with the laundry. She gave the entire kitchen a quick wipe-down, unplugged the kettle and the toaster, emptied the bin, and took the bag outside. Then she went upstairs to pack some things for Honor in the hospital. This is me riding to the rescue, Jo thought. Not on a white horse or with superpowers. I remove stains and save bananas from certain death. She moved quietly through the house, like a ghost, past the towering bookshelves and the dark furniture, being careful not to notice that she wasn't in any of the silver and gold-framed photographs. Chapter 5. Lydia. Some things about Granny Honor. I can't actually picture Granny Honor in hospital, lying down in a bed. She's always standing up. She barely sits down long enough to drink a cup of tea. She reads books whilst pacing. I've watched her, a novel raised to her face, walking back and forth across the rug in her living room. She keeps a pencil behind her ear, and sometimes she pauses to scribble in this notebook that she keeps open on a side table. Then back and forth again, frowning at the book in her hands, her bony nose pointed at the pages. Every now and then she mutters.
End of CD 1. CD 2.
There is an actual path worn in the rug where Granny Honor has paced back and forth, reading hundreds of books. Granny Honor is not a relaxing person. She's angular and hard, not the way you think of a grandmother being. Mum has photos of her mum, my Nanny Carol, who died before I was born, and she looks soft and huggy, even in a wheelchair, with a smile on her face in every picture. Granny Honor isn't like that. She has this way of looking at you, the same way that she looked at that book, as if she's scrutinising you, analysing you for what you're really trying to say. She's an expert in Russian literature, pretty much a genius. There's a whole shelf in her study upstairs filled with books she's written or contributed to, all with stiff, upright spines, and titles that have colons in them. She gave me my first lesson on first-wave feminism when I was like 3 years old. I always feel like an idiot next to her. I'm sure about 98% of the population would. But she's the reason I want to be a writer, I think, and definitely the reason why I want to read English if I go to Cambridge, instead of physics like my dad. She's so passionate about books, believes they really matter. Those have been the best conversations we've had, about books we've both read. They're probably the only real conversations we've ever had, actually. I feel a little bit stupid to talk to her about anything else. She sends me books for my birthday, and then when I visit her, or when she visits here, she takes me to a cafe, and we both order cake, coffee for her, hot chocolate for me, and we talk about the books. And those conversations are wonderful. Sort of like the stories really happened, but then you can take a step back and look at them almost from above, talking about how they were written, or why the author made this choice or that one, why they'd chosen a wardrobe as a magic portal, or why you even needed Lockwood in the first place, or what it meant that Manderley had burned. It's like zooming a powerful camera lens on all of these stories, so that you understand them better than anyone else. And as an added bonus, I am much better at English than anyone else in my year. In fact, Miss Drayton wanted me to take my GCSEs early and do an AS this year like I did with French, but I didn't because I wanted to stay with Avril. But when we're not talking about books, I'm not really sure what I should say to Granny Honor. I hope she's all right. Snakes and ladders, some naughty biscuits before bedtime, a good round of Thomas the Tank Engine, and a pillow fight. Lydia got Oscar Nairi into bed, came downstairs, heard Oscar calling and went back upstairs to get him another drink of water, and then she came downstairs again and collapsed on the sofa, automatically turning on the telly. She should revise, but her head felt heavy, her limbs weighted. She got so tired. All the time, every day, from pretending so hard, watching what she said, how long she looked, whether she touched. Watching other people watching her, wondering what was in their heads. Sometimes when she came home from school, she felt like she could barely stand up and talk. Not that she could really relax at home either, unless she was in her room alone, but at least Oscar Nairi didn't care what she was like, or what she was hiding, and Mum was too busy to notice her, to really notice her. Sometimes that made it harder, when no one was paying attention. Sometimes, when she was comfortable, she almost forgot to keep up the walls. On the way home from school, Avril had been talking about maybe going to her dad's for the summer holidays, after their exams were over. Her dad lived in Birmingham, And when Avril had gone there 2 years ago for the whole Easter holiday, Lydia had been more lonely than she'd ever been in her life. She reached for her phone. She had 5 messages. Avril, 1540. Sorry you couldn't come. Thanks for top. Avril, 1725. It was okay. Call me. Kiss. Mum, 1806. Hi, sweetie. Granny H OK. Going to pick up some things to make her more comfortable. We'll try not to be late. All okay with O and I? Cake in tin if you are hungry. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Avril, 1900. OMG, are you watching Top Model? This is vile. Ring me. Unknown number, 1911. Now you send me one. The last text had a picture attached. It was taken in the mirror so that the phone covered up most of his face, but she could still tell it was Harry. Chest bare, briefs pushed down to expose himself. She deleted it. Didn't even think, thumb working by itself. She deleted it and then held her phone, furious and much more shocked than she should be, considering she'd seen much worse. Much worse, just Googling kitten pictures. But never directed at her. Never sent right to her for her to look at, not able to avoid it because it was on her phone. Lydia's hands shook. What was he playing at? Did he think she'd like that? Did he think his dick was so mighty and powerful that she'd immediately melt, rip her clothes off at the mere sight of it, send him a photo screaming, "Please, please, objectify me, wank over my digital tits, please"? Her phone chimed with another message. Unknown number, 1926, or even better, one of you and Avril together. Lydia threw her phone across the living room. It hit Oscar's plastic toy garage and clattered to the floor. She stared after it, wide-eyed, breathing hard. He knew. Harry Carter knew. And if Harry knew, then his friends knew, then Erin knew, then Avril... She clenched her fists. No. He couldn't possibly know. She was too good at hiding. Harry Carter wasn't clever enough to see inside her head. Harry Carter was the sort of perv who thought that girls owed him naked selfies, who thought that if a girl and a girl got together, it was only so that a boy could watch them, who thought the only thing better than 2 tits was 4, who didn't understand real longing, real love, who didn't understand that his misspelled, barely literate text had pushed its way into thoughts she only allowed herself at night, alone with the doors closed. It had left greasy finger smears, the odour of sweat, on her dreams. Her phone chimed. She forced herself to breathe slowly, deeply. She walked over to the toy garage and picked her phone up, ready to block Harry's number, delete the texts. It was from Avril. Have you seen this photo shoot on TM? They are crying! Skype me when Kiddy's in bed. Cannot watch this alone. Lydia pressed the phone to her pounding heart. Avril didn't know. Harry couldn't know. Her mask hadn't slipped. She would never have let it. Chapter 6. Joe. I don't know how she's going to stay in that house by herself, said Joe, putting 2 more mugs of coffee on the table. Get a carer in? Suggested Sarah. She took another biscuit. I shouldn't have this, but I love your shortbread. I'm going to start a diet on Saturday so I don't look like a whale in Tenerife. You don't look like a whale, you have a lovely figure, said Joe automatically. Thanks, but you're lying. My arse needs its own postcode. She dunked the biscuit. Bob makes fun of me when I start diets. That's because he knows you don't need one. That's because he never notices me anymore. I swear he doesn't even see me. If I ask him if I look good in something, he just says yes without even glancing up from his phone. The only reason we don't bump into each other when we're walking around the house is because we're rarely in the same room. Well, you're both busy. The children he looks at. He's a great father. Billy, Sarah's eldest at age 4, wandered over to the table.
More biscuits,
he said hopefully, and Joe put some on a plastic plate. Don't forget to share them with the others, Joe told him. Offer them round, like a waiter. Billy trotted to the other side of the open-plan family room. That should give us another 5 minutes quiet, said Sarah. At least until he starts arguing with Oscar again about who gets more cars. It was a punctuation of every play date, breaking up a fight between Billy and Oscar. Fortunately, Iris and Polly, both under 2, could sit side by side playing and happily ignoring each other for hours. They were in a shaft of sunlight now, by the front window, making separate meals at Iris's toy kitchen. Do they grow out of the fighting and into the sharing? I ask you as a more experienced mother. There's a wonderful stage when they're 5, and it lasts through till about age 11. They're sweet and loving and funny. And then at age 11? Jo rolled her eyes in imitation of a teenager. Lydia, said Sarah. She's a wonderful girl. She really is. She's had so much to cope with, without a dad, and she works so hard at school, and she's so good with her brother and sister. But Jo tried to resist complaining, but it was too much. She's impossible at the moment. Yesterday I asked her to stay home and babysit while I went to London to see Honor, and you would have thought I proposed handcuffing her to the kitchen table. I was the same as a teenager. I thought I was so cool, and I made my mother's life hell. I feel sorry for it now. That's one consolation. I haven't told Mum, of course. Do you feel sorry for what you put your mother through? I didn't put her through anything. Mum and I always really got along. And I was always a good girl. Maybe too good. I liked pleasing people. Of course, my mum had multiple sclerosis, and she was unwell a lot of the time, so I had to grow up fast. Jo propped her chin on her hand, leaning on the table. I think I was more like Lydia's friend, Avril. She's always cheerful, always has a polite word for everyone. Isn't she the one whose mother? Jo nodded. Hasn't affected her, though. She's a lovely girl. I wish Lydia would take a leaf out of her book. Lydia's so negative. Sometimes it seems like there's no trace of that sweet little girl anymore. She's still in there. I remember exactly when it happened. It was age 11, actually. All the girls at her school were going crazy for these woven bracelet things they were making for each other. So I bought her some materials, which was fine. But then I made the mistake of looking some patterns up on the internet. I made her a bracelet after she'd gone to bed. It turned out quite well. The next morning, when I gave it to her, she was horrified. You were trying too hard to be cool? I thought I was just making her a bracelet. We used to do all those things together, before. When it was just the 2 of us. She sighed. That's another thing she's had to cope with. A stepfather. And our divorce. And other children taking up my time. You've raised her right, said Sarah. She's bound to become a human being sooner or later. I hope so. She wouldn't even say goodbye this morning on the way to school. It's as if she has a whole world inside her that she can't bear to share with me. Jo felt again the small stab of hurt at seeing her firstborn daughter slam out of the house, head down, mouth pressed shut. Or she's angry with me about something. What could she possibly have to be angry with you about? You're a great mum. You'd never do anything to upset your children. Jo felt a pang of guilt. She'd never told Sarah about her visits to Adam, nor how furious Lydia would be if she knew about them. On the other hand, she said quickly, Oscar and Iris were fed and happy and put down to bed safely last night, so she was serious about looking after them. She's a good kid underneath. Jo raised her mug to her mouth. The things our friends tell us because of loyalty. The things that they don't even allow out into conversation. Sarah would never consider saying that Lydia was turning into a stroppy little cow. No more than Jo would confirm aloud that Sarah actually had put on an extra half a stone since she'd stopped breastfeeding. Female friendship required building each other up. denying each other's faults, unhesitatingly taking each other's side, listening to problems and saying that they were really not that bad. Not digging too deeply for secrets that wanted to stay hidden. Friendship was a small miracle. Something Jo appreciated even more these days. Her friends in the centre of town, the other young mums she'd got to know during her first marriage when Lydia was a little girl, had all melted away after Stephen's death. She could understand it. They'd felt awkward, with their happy marriages and their living husbands. Jo was a widow, a tragic person, a reminder of all the things that could go wrong, all the things that could destroy your happiness in a split second. And, of course, as a single mother trying to hold down a job, she'd not had much time for a social life. Then she'd married Richard and moved out to the suburbs, where it was harder to talk with people, and she was busy having babies. Living in a beautiful house that felt like an island, her husband becoming more and more distant, until he left. She'd only known Sarah for just over a year. They'd met in the park one day, a sunny spring mid-morning when the play park was full of toddlers and preschoolers. Oscar was climbing up the slide and sliding down, again and again, letting out a whoop of joy each time. Jo was sitting on a bench at the side, and 6-month-old Iris was nestled in her arms, fast asleep in the sunshine. Spring had always been difficult for her, since Stephen. But it was a perfect day. Jo had gazed at her beautiful boy, so active and happy, and then down at her precious girl, asleep and rosy-cheeked and trusting. She listened to the shouts of children playing, and to her horror, felt tears gather in her eyes. She couldn't cry in the park. Everyone would see her. They would talk about her. That's the woman whose husband ran off with the 21-year-old au pair. Yes, apparently they were carrying on the entire time right under her nose. They live in one of those big new builds, so there was plenty of room for them to do it in. And her first husband, he was that man. You remember. Don't you remember how he died? The tears had poured out of her. Endless, refusing to wait until night-time when it was safe to cry. After the children had gone to sleep, Jo tried to blot them with Iris's blanket, but it was difficult to do without waking the baby. And she didn't want to wake the baby. A baby shouldn't spend the first months of her life surrounded by sadness and anger. A tear fell on Iris's face, and Jo wiped it off, as gently as she could with her shaking hands. She bowed her head and felt a bead of mucus hovering at the tip of her nose. She swiped at it with her hand, but it kept on coming, more and more of it, like the tears. She had tissues in her bag, but she couldn't reach them without disturbing Iris. Annoyance poked at her despair and anger. Why didn't anyone say something to her? If she saw someone crying in the park, anyone, she'd go up to them and offer them a tissue at least. She'd ask if they were all right. But no one came. It was the same as after Stephen's death, when the phone stopped ringing. It was a confirmation that from now on, Jo was on her own. Everything was down to her, only to her. The thought made her cry even harder.
Whoever he is, he's a bastard,
said a voice in front of her. Jo had wiped her nose, though it was useless, and looked up to see a woman standing with a baby on her hip. Her curly hair was like a black halo around her head.
Or is it postnatal depression? I had that with my first one. It sucks.
Don't you know? Sarah peered at her.
No, should I? Are you famous or something? Here, have a tissue.
Jo took it gratefully. I thought everyone would be talking about me.
May, haven't you noticed? Everyone in this park is too busy taking selfies with darling Hugo or Eugenie to spare a glance for anyone else. Rich people, they drive me crazy. People are much nicer over at Palmer Park. Last time I had a crying fit over there, a nice little old lady came over and offered me some homemade curry in a plastic container. I only come to this part for the sandpit. You want a wet wipe? Now, a year later, months of coffee and confidences behind them, Jo said, I don't mean to be negative. I think it's seeing Honor like that. I thought she was a force of nature, Sarah. I thought nothing could ever happen to her. Well, I only met her that one time and she was terrifying. How old is she? In her mid-70s at least. And she looked every year of it in that hospital bed. She didn't wake up once. It's going to happen to all of us eventually, no matter how scary we are. She's a very intelligent woman, said Jo. She raised Stephen all by herself, you know, while she was working as a university lecturer, and this was in the 70s and 80s. She's very admirable. She's just outspoken, and she likes having her own way. Sarah shook her head. It's amazing about you, Jo. You never say anything bad about anyone. Well, there's nothing bad to say. We've had our difficult moments in the past, but I feel sorry for Honor. She's so alone. Imagine putting me down as next of kin. It just shows how few people she has to help her. She has money, though, right? Wasn't she some sort of doctor? Not a medical doctor. She's got a PhD. She's an academic. So she should be able to afford to get someone in. She's probably saved up for something like this. I don't know. Academics aren't rich. I think she's living on her pension. I don't like to ask, of course. I'd offer to hire a nurse for her, but... Jo trailed off. Sarah knew her financial situation already, how she was more or less completely dependent on her ex-husband for support while the children were small. It's not the sort of thing I can ask Richard to do. Well, the local authority will get someone for her to help her out. The house is completely impractical, though. The kitchen's in the basement. That wouldn't be such a problem if she had someone bringing her meals. But even if she put a bed in her lounge, the ground floor doesn't have a bathroom. You have to go downstairs to the little toilet off the kitchen or upstairs to the proper bathroom on the first floor. Time to install a stair lift? Oh, I don't think Honor would hear of that. They're so ugly and slow. And anyway, the entire house is up a flight of steps from the road. If she stays there, even if she can get around inside, she'd be housebound most of the time. I think it would drive her crazy. She rides a bicycle everywhere normally. At her age, can you imagine? So, what you do then is find a big burly hunk of a carer who can look after her and carry her in his lovely muscular arms down the stairs and then push her in a wheelchair around the park every morning. Honor can have her fresh air and a hot man to look at. Simples. Jo laughed. And where should we find this hunky male carer? Hunky male carers are us. There must be some somewhere. There are millions of little old ladies who would welcome a scheme like this. In fact, I'm tempted to break my leg myself. The thing is, Honor is so independent. She's always done everything for herself. I can't see her being happy about being looked after by strangers. Well, nobody's a stranger once you've... Mummy! Billy took my car! There it goes, said Sarah, getting up from her chair. I'll sort it. While she squatted down between the boys and tried the delicate art of convincing preschoolers to share, Jo wiped down the table, rinsed out her mug, and put the kettle on again. The house in Stoke Newington, crowded with books and memories, was far too big for Honor on her own. In Jo's mind, it was difficult to separate Honor from her house. They were both tall and thin, crammed with knowledge and obscure references to a religion Jo didn't know much about. They shared a scent of paper and old wool. Whereas Jo didn't think that this big, airy house here in suburban Woodley reflected her at all. A house that reflected Jo would be crooked, full of cushions and textiles, pretty teacups and an antique dresser in the kitchen, painted floorboards and pastel walls, roaring fireplace, worn leather sofas, windows of old glass that distorted the view outside and made it magical. This house was too new, a cube of brick with faux white pillars in the front. Inside, the angles were all perfect, the windows draught-proof. Richard had insisted on choosing most of the furniture, and though it was tasteful and comfortable, it was too modern. When they'd moved in, Jo had tried displaying her collection of flowery teacups on an open shelf in the kitchen, but they didn't look right amongst all the stainless steel and granite. She put them back in their tissue wrappers, meaning to find another place for them, but then she'd had Oscar and she was too busy, and then Iris, and then it wasn't wise to have teacups around when you had 2 toddlers. The cups were at the back of a cabinet, in a box. Jo had lived here for nearly 4 years, since Richard had bought the house and they'd married, and aside from the clutter, she'd left hardly any trace on it. She'd meant to paint the walls, hang pictures, but the walls were still their original white, aside from the little handprints, the flecks of flung Weetabix. Maybe that was what Jo was made of after all. Smeary fingerprints and old cereal. Stephen and she had been saving up for an old cottage, where her teacups would have looked perfect, where every object was precious and full of happy memories. But then Stephen had died, and that was the end of that dream. She reached for the biscuit tin to refresh the plate, and saw movement outside the window. The hedge on the side facing the kitchen was low. Richard had planned to put up a fence to block the view of the cluster of chocolate box faux Victorian brick houses built there after they'd moved in. He'd been furious when they'd started building. "Too many people," he'd said. "It crowds the schools and puts more traffic on the roads." But what it meant was that the houses weren't expensive enough, that they brought down the tone of the neighbourhood. Every time Richard had looked out of the kitchen window and seen the builders at work, he'd flushed with anger and ranted about the council, building permissions, a fence. But then he'd never put the fence up. Knowing what she knew now, Jo supposed he'd been too distracted by Tatiana. There was someone on the other side of the hedge. From here, Jo could see him from the waist up. It looked like he was raking up grass clippings. A young man, in his 20s maybe. He had sunglasses pushed up into brown curly hair, and an unshaven face. "Stop it, filthy middle-aged lady," she thought, and smiled to herself. But she kept on looking, just for a moment, with the top of the biscuit tin in her hand in case she needed to look away and appear busy suddenly. Because a tug of attraction, no matter how inappropriate and one-sided, was better than thinking about the house she'd never had and the husband she'd lost. Focus on the positive. Focus on the future. Her mother had always told her that. And set Jo a good example. The MS that had eventually killed her had crippled her first. But despite her pain, she'd always kept cheerful. Her advice was what had kept Jo going after Stephen had died, in those colourless days that stretched on and felt as if they would never end. It was what had helped her over the past year since Richard had left. She had 3 beautiful children, and a comfortable house, and a good friend, and a body that wasn't so worn out that it couldn't respond to the sight of a good-looking man. "Whoa, who is that?" Sarah had come up behind her and was staring out of the window, close enough to brush against Jo. Jo's cheeks heated. "Don't! He'll see us." "But who is it?" "He must be one of the people in the new houses." Sarah sighed. "Do you remember what it was like, sleeping with a bloke in his 20s? Bob could do it all night." The wistful, lustful expression on Sarah's face made Jo laugh, despite her embarrassment. "Stephen used to—" She stopped herself. She turned back to the biscuit tin and loaded up the plate again with the last of her homemade shortbread. Dusted with sugar, cut into squares, crumbling at the edges. This was reality. This was now. Too many calories in the kitchen with the children playing nearby. It was a good life. It should be enough. Anyway, she said. I think that Honor should move in here with us for a little while.
Chapter 7. Lydia. I don't have to write about the first time I met Avril. I'll never forget it. But it makes me feel good to think about it. It's hard to believe it was only a bit more than 5 years ago. Mum married Richard in August, and I was the only bridesmaid. I probably should have put up more of a fuss, but I couldn't really believe it was happening. Mum made it into this whole bonding opportunity for us. Trying on dresses, choosing music and flowers. We went for coffee a lot, and we spent a lot of time talking about Dad. Not in a heavy way, just in a nice way, remembering him. We talked about the things we'd done together as a family, just the three of us. We looked at pictures of when I was a baby, and our holidays on the beach in Lowestoft. She reminded me of how he used to read me a story every single night, and how he named my favourite teddy bear Galileo. I think she wanted to reassure me that she wouldn't forget about him, even though she was getting remarried. Looking back at it, she was trying to reassure me, too, that I was still important to her. She let me choose almost all the music for the ceremony, and she let me choose her dress. Which, in retrospect, looking back at the photos, was a mistake, because at 11 I had this thing for big fluffy princess skirts and lots of sequins. I'd never been to a wedding before, and it was all pretty exciting for me. I got to invite all my friends to the reception, and we all drank litres of Coke and stayed up ridiculously late. Then I went on honeymoon with them to Thailand, which was brilliant in a way, but in another way it was awful, because Richard wasn't happy that I'd come along. He tried to hide it, and he bought me lots of things to make up for it. But I got the impression that all of this had been Mum's idea, and he'd have rather been alone with her. Every morning I got up early, and I saw how many lengths of the pool I could swim before they emerged from their room. I tried not to think about what they were doing in there, but I knew anyway. One night, in one of those fancy outdoor restaurants by the sea, where there are all these candles and fairy lights and impossibly beautiful people serving you your dinner, I tried to bring up one of the memories we talked about. Remember how Dad always wanted to build the highest tower made out of sand? All those different techniques he tried to stop it from crumbling. I expected my mother to laugh, like she usually did, and counter with the story of the one time he'd used the beach umbrella and it had opened up and flown away. But she didn't. She glanced at Richard, whose mouth had narrowed, and who was reaching for his wine. "Isn't it a beautiful sunset?" she'd said instead. "What is it, do you think, that makes them so much more colourful here than in England? It's the same sun, isn't it?" It's exactly the sort of inane thing Mum says when she wants everyone to be happy. And I got the message loud and clear. Of course a man on honeymoon wouldn't want to talk about his wife's first husband. Of course not. But the real message I got was that everything had changed now. And everything that had been was over. And within a week of us returning from Thailand, we'd moved out of our own house in the centre of Brickham near my primary school to this new house, and then Mum was pregnant with Oscar, and everything had changed. On top of starting secondary school, I was totally new in town as well. My new summer uniform was too big and it was scratchy. And I was scared. The summer was over, and I had to stop pretending I was special and start to think about coping with how I was different. I already knew I was different. I'd known for a long time, as long as I can remember, maybe even before Dad died. But I never really figured it out properly, never really thought it through, until that autumn, when everything was new. Sometimes I used to pretend that I had a superpower that nobody had noticed yet except for me. For example, that I had eyes that saw too much, that could see beyond the visible spectrum, beyond ultraviolet and infrared. I used to tell myself that I had to wear sunglasses in order to fit in with normal human beings. But that wasn't it. The sunglasses were just pretend. I didn't have superpowers. I don't. I have to hide in a much more obvious way than wearing sunglasses. At age 11, about to start secondary school,
I was learning about it. Mum walked me to school on my first day. She wore a blue dress that was nearly the same colour as my new scratchy school uniform, and though that was naff beyond words, I was sort of grateful for it. I suppose it was meant to be a sign of solidarity. After a few weeks of feeling increasingly like I was in the way in Richard's house, I felt that I needed all the help I could get. "I'm so proud of you," said Mum. She's always saying things like that. She's proud of every little thing that I do, which is nice, and I know it's meant to build self-esteem, but when you get to a certain age, you begin to realise that tying your own shoelaces, or starting secondary school, or even getting top marks in your year isn't really such a big thing to be proud of. We were getting near the school gates now, and I was looking for someone I knew. Anyone. Maybe someone who'd miraculously also moved here from my old primary school. I wanted someone to shield me. If I walked into the playground by myself, I would be too open, too visible. But all of the kids walking in were strangers. I couldn't even see anyone else new, like me, with their parents. They all looked hopelessly grown up, tall and confident, knowing exactly where they were going. "I've got this for you," Mum said. She'd stopped, so I stopped too to see what she was talking about. She took something out of the pocket of her dress. It was a man's wristwatch, gold, with a brown leather strap. I knew this watch. Mum kept it in her jewellery box, right at the back. I got it out and looked at it sometimes. It was engraved on the back. "From J to S, with love forever." It was the watch my mother had bought my father for their wedding. She had saved up her earnings at the cafe for nearly a year to afford it. The gold plating was a little scratched, but the glass was uncracked. "I can't wear it," I told her. "It's not part of the uniform. Put it in your pocket. No one will know." I slipped it into my own pocket, feeling the weight of it. "Thank you." "Daddy would be proud of you too," Mum said. So proud to see his little girl grown up. And that was not what I needed to hear. Not right now. Not with my dead father's watch in my pocket and a whole ocean of children I didn't know waiting to look at me. I bit the inside of my lip hard enough to hurt, so that I wouldn't cry. I turned away from Mum and her soft green eyes, and it was that exact minute that I saw a girl walking towards us. She had a summer uniform on too, but it looked less stiff than mine, as if she'd been wearing it for longer. Her dark hair was brushed back into a neat ponytail. She had brown eyes and a small mole by the side of her mouth, and she had a blue X-Men backpack slung over one shoulder. She was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. She was a total stranger, but she walked right up to me and Mum, and she said, with a smile, "Hi, my name is Avril. I'm new and I don't have anyone to walk in with, and I wondered if you would walk in with me." I couldn't help but stare. This beautiful girl, with her X-Men backpack and her easy, confident walk, dared to go right up to a stranger and ask something like that. I never would have dared that in a million years. What kind of girl was this? Was she even safe? Why would she choose me, of all people? "Oh, that's so kind, Avril," said Mum in her gentle voice. "Lydia doesn't know anyone either." I elbowed Mum, who was making me look bad in front of this girl. But the girl just smiled at Mum, and then she smiled at me. "That would be really great," she said. There was a little waver in Avril's voice as she spoke. A little tiny waver that maybe she was hoping no one else would even notice. I noticed it. "OK," I said. Mum went to hug me, and I stepped back a little, wanting a hug, maybe, but also knowing it wasn't really cool. And Mum took the hint, for a miracle, and put her hands back into her pockets. "Have a wonderful day, Liddy. Tell me all about it afterwards." "All right," I said. And the beautiful girl, Avril, and I walked through the school gates together. We walked, not saying anything, shoulder to shoulder, and all I could think was, I am walking next to the most beautiful girl in the school. When we got into the middle of the playground, I risked a glance backwards, but Mum was gone. She would be walking quickly back home, and she would have that smile on her face that she got when she was trying not to cry. I was glad I didn't have to see it. "Do you like X-Men?" asked Avril. "It's my favourite film." "I like it too." "What would be your mutant power?" "I'd be able to see everything." "I'd be invisible." "But if you could see everything, you would be able to see me." I could look at you forever, I thought. My heart pounding, I said, "We'd have to work together." "Thank you," said Avril. "I was a little bit scared back there, but as soon as I saw you and your mum, I knew you would help me." "There's no need to be scared," I said. And at that moment, I knew I was saying the truth. "It's all going to be fine. You can hold this for a little while, if you want." I took out Daddy's watch and put it into her hand. It's a magic watch. It can make you feel brave, because my Daddy was brave, and it was his. She took it and turned it over in her hands, and she nodded. "I feel better already," she said. And that was the beginning of everything. Chapter 8. Honor. "No," said Honor. "That is not a good idea." She felt rather than saw the hurt on Joe's face, and heard the recoil of her body. It was literally as if she'd been slapped. Joe never could hide anything. From the first time Stephen had brought her home, his new and beautiful girlfriend, Joe's face had been open and childlike. Every emotion written on it plain to see. The emotion had been worse, more exposing than her cheap dress and bad shoes, the books she hadn't read. Everything about her screamed, "Will you be my mother too? My new mother, to replace the one I've lost?" Honor had winced in embarrassment for her. "But it's the best thing," Joe insisted. "You wouldn't have to worry about meals, or company, or getting around. There won't be any stairs for you at all, not like at home. The key word," said Honor, "being home. I have no desire to leave my home, where I have lived nearly all of my life. The home my father bought and furnished." "Mrs. Levinson, you've had a serious accident." Honor didn't know the consultant, and she didn't remember his name. He was a strip of a thing with a high-pitched voice. "Don't talk down to me. I know what you're trying to say. I'm old. And yes, I am old, but that's not the problem. The problem is that I fell down the stairs. Anyone could fall down the stairs, no matter what their age. I don't plan to do it again." "Nobody's saying you're old," said Joe. "In fact, I think you're in amazing shape, Honor. You rode your bicycle every day, didn't you, up until you fell?" Honor pressed her lips together. This was the worst of it. Worse than the pain. The condescension. From everyone, not only from Joe, but from Joe it was worse. Joe, who no longer wore cheap clothes or bad shoes, but who otherwise hadn't changed at all. A beautiful blur of bouncing auburn hair, flowery dress, cheery voice. She wore rose-scented perfume and a necklace made out of string threaded through pieces of dried pasta, which clicked together as she moved and advertised, "I am a mother of small children." "What we're saying," Joe continued, "is that you should be somewhere that you can be looked after while you recover." "Nonsense! I'll hire a nurse." "You should be with people who care about you." "And that is you, is it?" "Well, yes, of course." But the slight hesitation gave her away. "You don't like me," Honor said. "We have never liked each other, and Stephen's death has set us free from each other. You don't want me in your home. You don't like visiting me. You're offering out of guilt." "I'm offering because you're Stephen's mother, and Lydia's grandmother, and you need help, and I'm happy to give it. And of course I like you in my home, Honor. You're always welcome there." How did she manage to say things like that, and sound so sincere? It was a skill that Honor had never possessed. "No," she said. As I'm sure you know, Mrs. Levinson, we aren't happy about discharging elderly patients unless there is a home care plan in place. Dr. Levinson, she told him. My name is Dr. Levinson. It is not Mrs. Levinson. If you don't like calling me doctor, since I'm not a medical person like you, perhaps you will be so kind as to call me Honor. The doctor shuffled his notes. We have a bedroom on the ground floor with an ensuite bathroom, said Joe. That's Lydia's, isn't it? Lydia will be happy to let you use it. We'll repaint the room and hang new curtains. My friend Sarah's husband, Bob, says he'll drive his van up to London and fetch any of your furniture you'd like to have with you, so you can sleep in your own bed if that makes you more comfortable. And Dr. Chin says he's happy to refer you to the Royal Berks if you need any follow-up care. You seem to have this all arranged, said Honor dryly. The children would love to have you too, said Joe. Honor grunted. They'd be excited, insisted Joe. Lydia was going to make you a card. She really wanted to, but she had homework. It's her exam year, you know. Honor had 5 cards. One made by Oscar, a finger painting that had been labelled in Joe's neat handwriting as a dinosaur. 2 made by Iris, with the same finger paints, but no discernible subject. One from Joe, with a picture of hyacinths. One from her neighbour Charvy, who was in her 50s, and complained about her sciatica every time she walked up the front stairs. The cards jostled for space on the tiny bedside cabinet, along with a plastic jug of water and a cardboard kidney dish containing Honor's toothbrush and toothpaste. They fell down whenever a doctor or nurse drew the curtains around the bed of the snoring woman who was next to her in the ward, and Honor had given up trying to keep them upright. She also had one balloon. This was new. Joe had brought it today, along with grapes, a novel that Honor would never read, and a plastic box of homemade brownies to keep your strength up. Joe had bounced in, smelling of roses, her shoes whispering on the floor, and the balloon trailing behind her. It had taken Honor a few moments to work out what it was. It was silver and yellow, round, with a streaming yellow ribbon, and it said "Get Well Soon" on it. What is that? Honor had said, looking up from the book she wasn't reading. I thought it might cheer you up, said Joe, as bright as the balloon, even though Honor could see that her flat question had hit home. Joe tied it to the railing at the foot of the bed and said, There, that looks jolly. It was ridiculous. It would get in the way of the nurses when they changed the bed linen. It would lose its gas within a day and droop. It made her appear to be a child. Honor planned to ask a nurse to remove it as soon as Joe left. But Joe did not seem eager to leave. She was eager, instead, to have Honor moving in with her. No, Honor said again. I'd rather have a nurse. Joe turned to the doctor. Maybe Honor and I need some time too. I'll let you talk it over, he said, and left them. Joe sat down in the chair next to the bed. Honor, she said softly, so bloody kindly. I understand that you want to stay in your own home, but this is just a temporary measure. Nurses are expensive, and although I'm sure the council can help you, with us you wouldn't have to. I am perfectly able to take care of myself. You needn't worry, I'll be up and on my feet in no time. But all those stairs, she said firmly, will be fine. You must have put me down as your next of kin for some reason, Honor. Honor was gratified to hear the exasperation in Joe's voice. It was better than this cheeriness and this patience that must be false, that she must be putting on for the doctor's benefit, for her benefit. I didn't have anyone else, she said. And I don't need anyone else either. I am absolutely fine on my own. The mattress underneath the sheet was lined with plastic. It rustled every time Honor moved. It kept moisture on the surface, so that at night her body felt steamed like a slice of fish. Until now she had never spent a single night in hospital. Even when she'd had Stephen, she'd insisted on going home the same day, before dark. The woman across from her had dementia and spent every morning from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock calling for someone called Twisty. The woman next to her snored. When Honor did get to sleep, nurses woke her up to take observations, and she would lie awake afterwards, staring into the half-light, waiting for the pain to begin again. The medication they gave her helped, but it wore off. First there was a dull throbbing, then a slow knife through her hip. By the time the nurse came with her pills, she was on fire. This evening she had caught herself nearly snatching at the pills, wanting to cram them into her mouth and down her throat, under the steady gaze of the nurse. She had carefully returned them to the paper cups. "I don't think I need them today," she had said. And now it was 3 in the morning. Not that you would know it, with the lights on and the nurses wandering back and forth on their crepe soles, talking in low murmurs. The balloon bobbed at the end of her bed and made crinkling sounds every time someone passed. She had not read her bank statements for some time, but her memory was good. She knew her expenditure, her income. Her only asset was her house, the house her father had bought, which she would not sell. The occupational therapist who had come to see her this afternoon after Joe left had told her what a private nurse would cost. It was more than she could afford. And what would the council be likely to provide? "We would move you to a rehabilitation centre," said the OT, who was brisk and smelled of mint gum and cigarettes. "You would stay there until you were able to cope on your own, perhaps with someone to pop in once a day to help you. The benefit of this would be that you would be in the system if you need more help in the future." In the system. The system that led to trading your home for an institution, losing your life to dependency. The system that crunched up old people who were past their use and shoved them into strange bare rooms and the condescending voices of strangers. Honor lay back on her pillow, took a deep breath of air that smelled of hospital laundry and disinfectant, and closed her eyes. She thought about Stephen, as she always did. First thing upon waking, last thing upon falling asleep. Stephen's hair slicked to his head when he was born, and the way his squashed-up face turned to hers. Stephen running in the sunshine in Clissold Park, his knees covered in scabs and grass stains. Stephen after a nightmare, climbing into bed with her, pushing his sweat-dampened head under her chin, against her neck, sighing into that heavy, childish sleep. Her one precious boy. She thought about Stephen until the pain swam away somewhere else, and she was able to sleep. She is in the synagogue, her father's synagogue, in a little room to the side, waiting to be called to her son's funeral. She wears a black dress. A torn ribbon is pinned to her breast. She is alone, the only mourner, as she was at her father's funeral. But this is her son's. This is a dream, and she knows it even as she's dreaming. Stephen's funeral wasn't like this. His funeral was in the Brickham crematorium, and it was crowded with flowers and people. She sat in the front row, and Joe was there beside her, her arms around Lydia. The air was hot and June heavy. There were no ribbons to tear, no way to show grief but crying. In the dream, the door opens by itself into the main body of the synagogue, and Honor walks to the front, painfully, as if moving through a forest of knives. She expects a closed coffin, simple blank pine, but this one is open. Stephen lies inside in his black suit. His face is peaceful and unmarked. He could be asleep, except that he is lying flat on his back with his hands folded on his stomach, and Stephen always slept on his side, curled up. There is no one else in the synagogue but her and her dead son. No rabbi, no congregation. Wife and child of the deceased are also official mourners, But Joe and Lydia are not there. Honor's footsteps echo in the room. She lays her hand on Stephen's. "You shouldn't have done it," she whispers to his handsome, still face. "You should have kept on running." Stephen does not stir. But behind her she hears a muffled footstep, and she turns, and Stephen is standing at the back of the synagogue, in the light shining through the tall windows. He wears his running clothes, T-shirt, shorts with a hole in the hem, battered trainers. "Why did you never tell me?" he says to her, across the distance of pews and time. His voice sounds exactly as it did in life. Exactly as it did when he asked her those questions. She did not reply then. She cannot reply now. She wants to run to him, to take him in her arms, to breathe him in deep, but the anger in his eyes roots her to the spot, her hand still on the hands of her dead son. "Why did you keep him a secret from me?" he says. "All my life. Why did you never tell?" Honor woke up, suddenly and completely. Her hip screamed with pain, but she had only made a gasp. It echoed in her ears, along with the pounding of her heart. Her dream had been bright and clear, every colour sharp, but now the half-darkness of the ward pressed on her eyes and on her chest. It was silent, as it never was in a hospital, and the curtains were drawn around her bed, and she was alone. Alone always and forever, with all of the choices that had left her alone. She groped for the call button, and before she could press it, she knew that she would go to her daughter-in-law's house. She would go. She would have no choice, if only to hear the noises of other people in the middle of the night, to feel their gravitational pull when it was dark, when she was alone and in pain, unable to stop hearing the questions, remembering the omissions she had made, the people she had lost, the prayers, that mourner's Kaddish by the graveside, familiar as the rhythm of her heart, that she had never said. Chapter 9. Lydia. Every day I run through 100 scenarios of where it could happen. On the top of a bus, in the back of a classroom, on our walk to school, on a wind-blasted moor, in the back row of the cinema, on a sleepover in my bed. In every single one of those fantasies, I'm blushing and stammering. I wish I could imagine myself eloquent and passionate, but I can't. I'm blushing and stammering, and I look like I'm terrified. And in every single one of those fantasies, Avril takes my hand and pulls me close. "Me too," she says. Or even better, she whispers it. It could happen. It is possible. Maybe Avril's been hiding how she really feels all of this time. Or maybe she just doesn't realise it, but when I confess, her eyes will widen, everything will click into place, the world will make sense at last, and we will be exactly who we're meant to be. And the world will explode into flowers and unicorns and happy, happy, joy, joy balloons and streamers and confetti, and wars will cease, and there will always be rainbows. It isn't possible. I know it isn't. It's not like I'm afraid of being gay. It's the 21st century. Being gay is all right. The gay kids at school stick together like a tribe. Georgie and Whitney are practically the couple of the year. Though sometimes I wonder if they're mainly together because they're the only out lesbians in the entire school. So they don't have a lot of choice but each other. If you can stick it out, if you're popular enough and weird in the right kind of way, if you can laugh off the insults and the teasing and not mind being defined by this one thing about you, instead of by all the myriad other things that you also are. If you can live your life as a caricature of yourself and fit in with what people expect of you, if you can adapt from one kind of pretending to an entirely different type of pretending, it's all right. It's survivable. You can even be proud of it. if it makes sense to be proud of something that you've had about as much choice in as the colour of your eyes or the shape of your nose. If you're brave enough, and also if you don't happen to be in love with your best friend. Teachers thought they knew what went on in the classroom, but they really didn't have a clue. As Mr. Singh droned on and on about quadratic equations at the front of the room, doing all the whiz-bang stuff on the interactive whiteboard that he thought made up for the fact that his lessons were boring on a galactic scale, a piece of folded paper was being passed from desk to desk around the classroom. When it got to someone, they unfolded it, sniggered, and wrote something down before folding it up again. Lydia was doodling in her notebook, big swirls and flourishes. It helped her think, especially since Harry Carter had plonked himself down right next to her in the lesson and was trying his best to get her attention. He might have scraped himself into top-set maths by the skin of his teeth, but he was an idiot of the first degree who could not take a hint. Avril was in a different math set, so Lydia couldn't even glance at her and roll her eyes. She'd chatted with Avril for hours last night, as usual. They'd watched Top Model together on Skype, and then from the beginning on +1, and then they just hung out, talking about nothing, like they always did. The tip of Lydia's pen swirled into a spiral, round and round inwards towards a small centre point. She knew absolutely everything about Avril, and Avril knew everything about her, except for this one thing. It was the one question she could never ask. So she sifted through the information she had about her best friend, all the secrets and the confidences, like one of those oracles they'd learned about when they read Julius Caesar, poking through entrails to find out the future. Avril was a virgin, the same as Lydia. She'd never had a serious boyfriend, just some snogs, the same as Lydia. They'd snogged the same boy, Lucius Arnsworthy, in Year 9, and they'd both agreed he was fish-lipped. But did that even mean anything? If a boy was fish-lipped, you didn't exactly have to be gay to work it out. Psst! It was Harry hissing at her. She kept her eyes on her spiral, going over and over the middle point so that her pen dug a hole in the centre. Psst! This time he reached over towards her. Lydia leaned back, but he didn't try to grab her. He put the folded piece of paper that was making the rounds on her desk on top of her notebook. Then he smirked at her. Lydia waited until Mr. Singh's back was turned at the whiteboard to open it, under the cover of her desk. Bailey Swindon is a carpet muncher. Put your initials below if you agree and pass it on. There were a dozen sets of initials below it, in different colours of pen and pencil. She turned to glance back at Bailey. The other girl was bent over her notebook, writing something, presumably the equations that Mr. Singh was babbling on about. With the other hand, she was scratching her nose. She didn't have the slightest idea that this primary school trick was going on around her, poor cow. Lydia held up the note and ripped it in half. Then she tore it into strips, then shreds. She collected the bits of paper in her hand and walked up to the front of the room, where the bin was. "Lydia," said Mr. Singh, who miraculously noticed that she was out of her seat. "What are you doing?" "Getting rid of rubbish, sir," she said, and dumped the paper into the bin. Sniggers. Harry made a goofy face at her. Bailey kept on writing. When the bell rang for break, Harry was over at her desk like a shot. "Did you like what I sent you last night?" "Not much." Lydia put her books in her bag and tried to look the perfect mixture of disdainful and uncaring. As if she had nothing at all to hide. As if she hadn't thought of Harry's text once since he'd sent it. "I didn't like your note just now either." "That wasn't my note. I didn't sign it." "Anyway, you owe me a picture now. Don't forget." "I don't owe you anything, Harry." She picked up her bag and went for the door. "I think you're really pretty. And you're clever, too." "Well, that's nice." She didn't miss the jealous gazes of the group of Year 9 girls they passed. Ideally, she would tell him to piss off. But she couldn't shake off the niggling fear that he might know something. "Did you like my idea of you and Avril together? She's hot, too," Don't be gross. I'll send you something again tonight. Maybe that will change your mind. Or maybe you'd rather see it in person. He bent closer to her to say it, and his breath warmed her ear. His hand rested on her hip. That was enough. Lydia stopped and glared at him. Can't you take a hint, or do I need to spell it out for you? I'm not interested in you. I think you're an immature tosser with a head as big as a football pitch and the sense of humour of a flea. I don't want to see any selfies of your tiny dick or any other part of you. Got it? Harry stepped back. His eyes narrowed, and to Lydia he looked more intelligent than he ever had before. She was aware of the people around them. Quiet now.
End of CD 2. CD 3.
He was going to say it. Say what he knew. He was going to strike back at her because she'd rejected him in public. He shrugged. See you later, he said, and turned and loped away, leaving Lydia feeling weak and sick. Later they were in Lydia's room. Avril was lying on the bed, painting her nails with Lydia's purple varnish, and Lydia was sitting with her back against the bed, choosing music on her iPod. Every time Avril shifted, Lydia could feel it against her back. I think you're a little bit harsh on Harry, Avril said. She hadn't mentioned it to Avril. Who told you? Avril shrugged. A few people were talking about it. Why did you do it? Well, for one thing, he was passing around this stupid note about the new girl in my maths lesson. It's like something a 10-year-old would do. And for another thing, he keeps on asking for pictures of my tits. Oh, all the boys do that. I don't mean anything by it. Avril rolled over onto her back, fingers held high in the air. Are you sure you don't fancy him? Fancy him? God, no. Why would I tell him where to get off if I fancied him? I don't know. You're weird like that sometimes, Lids. You like telling people off. I don't. You do. Like with Darren Raymond. And your mum, you're always arguing with her. That's not because I like it. I just... You know, sometimes people like to argue with the people they fancy. It's like an attraction, love, hate thing. I do not love Harry Carter. Okay, I don't. I don't even like him as a person. He's not that bad. He seems okay, actually. Her voice was elaborately nonchalant. Lydia twisted round. You don't fancy him, do you? He's fit. Everyone thinks so. Maybe he's fit, but I've got to tell you, Avril, he's a twat. Avril waved her hands in the air, like two purple-tipped starfish. Lydia snagged the bottle of varnish before she knocked it over. But he is so gorgeous, Lids, confessed Avril. So incredibly, wonderfully, astoundingly, epically gorgeous. Those dimples. Oh, my God, I just want to lick them. You do? I didn't want to say anything before because I thought you might like him, but if you're sure you don't, I'm really sure. But Avril, you can't like him. Why not? I can like whoever I want. But he's... Lydia struggled to put it into words. The thing was, Avril was right. Harry wasn't any worse than a lot of the other boys. The real problem with Harry was that he wasn't Lydia. You deserve a lot better than him. Everyone fancies him, absolutely everyone. When I thought he liked you, I was sort of jealous. He doesn't like me, doesn't even know me. So you don't mind if I ring him? Lydia began painting her own nails, turning her face away from Avril's. I won't ring him if you mind, Avril added quickly. Lydia bit her lip and concentrated on filling in her thumbnail. I don't. You can ring whoever you want, Av. But I really do think you deserve better. Better than the most popular boy in the school? Girl, you should be holding out Harry Styles. That's what I'm doing. Avril giggled. Well, same name. And I think he's as good looking. I wonder what he looks like naked. All that luscious skin, like chocolate ice cream. The picture Harry had sent to Lydia swam in front of her eyes, making her paint her skin instead of her nail. She shook her head slightly to try to dispel the image, but the problem was, once you saw something like that, you couldn't unsee it. You kept on thinking about it. Whenever Harry's name was mentioned, you automatically thought about Harry's dick. Maybe that was what Harry had intended. But why? Why would anyone want someone to think that way about them? It seems so dirty, so animal, so far removed from love. She wondered if she should have kept the photo instead of deleting it. She could have shown it to Avril now, like a treat that only Lydia could share, and been rewarded with her squeal of delight, or even better, disgust. It could have been an object of complicity between them. But even if they giggled about it, laughed and mocked him, burst into snorts of laughter whenever they saw him in the hallway, Lydia would still know that Avril had that image in her head forever. And what if Avril liked it? What if that was what Avril wanted? "You wouldn't believe," she began. But then she thought better of it and shut her mouth. She'd wanted to tell Avril about the photo now that it was gone, share the experience in some way, because the last thing that Lydia needed was to keep any more secrets from her best friend. And because they could still have the giggling, still have the complicity, without the actual photo around to pollute them. But if Avril actually liked Harry, really liked him, maybe she would be jealous that Harry had sent Lydia a photo. She'd been jealous when she thought Harry liked her. Avril would probably be happier if she didn't know. "Wouldn't believe what?" "How I have completely messed up this manicure." Lydia drew a purple line down her entire hand with the nail varnish brush and held it up for Avril to laugh at. A knock on the bedroom door. 2 quick ones, not a volley of toddler banging, so it was Mum. The door opened almost immediately and Jo poked her head in. "Hello, girls." "Hello, Avril, I didn't know you were here. Do you want to stay for tea? It's lasagna." "Yes, please, Mrs. M, that would be great. Mum, do you mind waiting for me to answer before you come barging in?" "Oh, sorry." Her mother didn't take the hint, though. She opened the door all the way and stood in the doorway, twisting a lock of hair in her hand as if she were purposely trying to look like a nervous schoolgirl. "Are you revising?" "Yes," said Lydia, though any fool could see they weren't. "I need to talk to you about Granny Honor." Lydia nodded. She knew what was coming. Her mother was going to ask her to make a handmade get-well card, as if she were a little kid like Oscar Irie. "I'll ring her," she said quickly, before Mum could suggest it. "I did try to ring her yesterday, but she didn't pick up, so I sent her a text." "Does Honor even know how to do texting?" Mum asked. "She never answers. I'm glad she's better," Lydia added, because she was. "She's agreed to come and stay with us for a little while. Isn't that great? It will be good for you to spend some more time with your grandmother, more than just an afternoon visit every now and then. And Oscar and Iris hardly know her." "She doesn't like little kids," said Lydia. "She told me one time that Dad was the only baby she'd ever liked. She said she had little or no desire to spend time with a creature who couldn't engage in rational discourse, and that she vastly preferred children after the age of 7. Well, she won't be able to hold out for long against Oscar and Iris. They're so much fun." "They're sweet little kids," Avril agreed loyally. Mum took a deep breath. "There's only one thing. Honor won't be able to get up flights of stairs, so she'll need to take over this room for a little while." "But the guest room is tiny. Where am I going to put all my stuff? And I'm doing my GCSEs. I need somewhere quiet to study. There's no room in there for a desk even." "Well, I was thinking that you might want to move up to the top floor. It's about time we did something with all that space, anyway." The finished loft space was where Tatiana had slept, until she ran off with Richard the sleazeball. They'd been using it as a junk room ever since, shoving all of Richard's stuff up there that they didn't want to deal with. It was bigger than her current bedroom, though because it was under the eaves, there were parts of it where the sloped ceiling was too low to stand up under. "You'd have your own ensuite up there," Mum added, "and it would be quieter for you to study in, right at the top of the house. We can clear out all the junk and maybe give it a fresh coat of paint on Saturday." Lydia looked around at her bedroom, painted her favourite shade of purple, with her posters exactly where she liked them, all of her stuff arranged just so. This room was the only good thing about moving to this house. Aside from Avril, of course. The French doors out to the garden that she opened on warm days to fill the room with fresh air. At night she heard hedgehogs snuffling in the garden. A few times she'd heard the bark of a fox. When she couldn't sleep, she slipped out of the house and gazed at the stars. Their faraway brilliance made her think, for a little while, that her own problems weren't that big after all. "I'd love to have a room like that," said Avril. "Tucked up away at the top of the house. It's so romantic." Her eyes were wistful. "All right then," said Lydia, with enough resignation in her voice to make her mother understand the weight of what she was asking. How Lydia, once again, was the one who shouldered the changes her mother had decided to make. "Wonderful!" Mum stood up, beaming. "I think this room will be perfect for Honor. She'll be right at the heart of the house, where we can look after her. Anyway, dinner will be ready in a few minutes, girls. I'll call you when it's on the table." She went to the door and paused. "You know what would be really nice, Liddy? If you made Granny Honor a lovely handmade get-well card after you finished revising for your manicure exam." As soon as Mum left, Avril flopped back down on the bed full length. "That room is huge! What colour are you going to paint it?" "I don't know." "Also, have you thought that it's the same room where Richard was shagging Tatiana?" "Yuck!" "I know." "Your poor Mum. She didn't deserve that." Avril sighed. "Honestly, I have no idea why Mum is so mad keen to have my grandmother move in. They hate each other. I can't imagine your Mum hating anyone. It's not hate so much as this awful tension between them. Mum gets all chirpy whenever she's around, a little bit manic. And Granny Honor just looks down her nose at her. It's really awkward. And she's like my only living relative besides Mum, so Mum feels we have to spend time together. It's easier when I just go and visit Granny Honor in London. We don't have to talk much. Do you want to know something secret?" Lydia climbed up on the bed too, and lay down so they were side by side. Their legs aligned, heads close, shoulders touching, hands clasped the same way. Avril was warm, and her hair smelled of grapefruit shampoo. "What?" Lydia said. "Sometimes I wish your Mum was my Mum. Wouldn't that be great? Then we could be sisters. Real sisters." Her voice was sad. Avril hardly ever talked about her life at home, but Lydia knew, of course. She'd been there often enough when the bedroom door was shut, and they had to creep around the house, making as little noise as possible. She put her arm around Avril and hugged her. "I wish that too," she lied. Chapter 10. Joe. "Where's Daddy?" Oscar jumped up so that he could see better out of the window. "He should be here any minute, sweetheart." Joe shifted Iris on her lap and adjusted one of the slides in her thick dark curls. "I know he can't wait to see you." "He's late again." Lydia appeared in the doorway, in skinny jeans and a stomach-skimming T-shirt, her hair artfully messy and her eyes lined with too much black. "Jesus Christ, that man is pathetic." "He's their father," Joe reminded her. She heard the tartness in her own voice and softened it. "Where are you going?" "Out." "I thought you might want to help me with the painting." "Oh, Mum! I thought you were going to do Granny Honor's room and I was going to do mine." "Well, yes, but I could do with a hand. Or you could paint upstairs and I could paint downstairs and we could meet for lunch. It would be like a painting party." "Party!" said Iris, clapping her hands. "I've told Avril I would meet her." Avril could help. Lydia gave Joe a look that clearly said, "Are you mad?" Joe wondered where teenagers learn these things from. "I'm doing revision, remember? I'll do it tomorrow." Tomorrow is when we have to go and pick up Granny Honor. I'll do it tonight, then. Don't forget to text me. Whatever. Lydia headed for the front door. I'll be back later. Don't you want to say hello to Richard? What for? She banged the door after her. Charming. But Jo had to admit, Lydia did slightly have a point. Even though Jo believed that Richard had tried his best to be pleasant to Lydia, the two of them had never clicked. It had been the subject of many discussions between Jo and Richard when they were still married. Jo had said that maybe it was because Lydia, who'd been 11 when Jo and Richard married, was too old to accept a new parent figure in her life. Richard would snort and say, "Nonsense. She remembers her own father and I can't compare." Jo would deny it. But in this particular thing, out of all the things that Jo and Richard discussed during their marriage, Richard had been right. Jo had known it even as she denied it. Richard couldn't compare to Stephen. Maybe that was even why she'd married Richard. Probably that was why she'd married him. It was easier to accept something lesser. "Daddy!" cried Oscar, and Iris launched herself off Jo's lap to toddle over to Oscar at the window. Jo saw Richard's Jaguar parked on the drive behind her own Range Rover. There were two people getting out of it. Her stomach sank, but she said brightly, "Here he is. Look, Iris, it's Daddy's car. He's come to take you out for the weekend." "Daddy!" Oscar yelled again, and he scampered to the front door, Jo following with Iris in her arms. He was just tall enough to reach the doorknob and open the door before Richard could knock. His father stood on the doorstep. He wore an open-necked shirt, white to suit his tanned complexion. His black hair was casually styled. He looked not one day older than the day he'd come into the estate agent she'd been working at as a receptionist and made a beeline for her, told her his property requirements, and then asked her out for dinner. "Hey, Oscar," he said, holding out his arms to his son. His expensive watch glinted in the sun. Oscar ran to him and was scooped up. Iris hid her face in Jo's neck. "Hello, Richard," said Jo. "Hello, Tatiana." Richard's new girlfriend, the person whom Jo had hired, at Richard's insistence when Iris was born to help her with the children, stood slightly behind Richard and had the grace to look self-conscious. She was tall and willowy, with long, straight dark hair and the casual posture of youth. Her face was as tanned as Richard's. She wore an effortlessly chic outfit of white linen trousers and a black sleeveless top. "Hi, Jo," she said in her Russian accent, all fur hats and sexiness. Richard kissed his son and held out his other hand for his daughter, but Iris shrank away from him. "Honey, it's your daddy." "She's feeling a little shy today," said Jo, smiling. She did not say, "She barely remembers you." She did not say, "You didn't come to see them last week when you said you would." She did not say, "You ran off with Tatiana before Iris had the chance to know who you were, and deep down I'm glad that she's shy with you." "It's Daddy, darling," she crooned to Iris instead. "He's going to take you out somewhere nice." "No," said Iris against her neck. "We're going to ride in Daddy's car," crowed Oscar, who had not forgotten his daddy, who had a photograph of Daddy beside his bed and spoke about his daddy most evenings before he went to sleep, and whose questions about why Daddy hadn't come today occasionally forced Jo to lie about Daddy's important job, which kept him busy and far away. "It's such a sunny day that we thought we'd go to the seaside," Richard told him, and Oscar wriggled and crowed again. "The seaside?" said Jo. "That's lovely, of course, but I didn't pack—" "Don't worry, just to Bournemouth. We can buy sunscreen and all the extra things they'll need. And ice cream," added Richard, and Oscar bounced up and down in his arms. "Chocolate ice cream!" he yelled. "Any flavour you want, my boy." "Did you hear that?" Jo said to Iris, who was breathing hot into the hollow of her collarbone. "Ice cream." "And fish and chips for tea," said Richard. "What do you say, Irie? Want to come?" "No." Iris's voice was muffled in Jo's hair.
She clasped her hands more tightly.
Mummy!
"Oh, sweetie," murmured Joe, cradling the precious little body. "It's your daddy. He wants to spend time with you. He'll bring you back on Sunday afternoon."
No!
It's her favourite word at the moment, Joe explained to Richard. She doesn't always mean it. "Iris, do you want to come with me, darling?" Tatiana held out her arms.
No,
said Iris, but she lifted her head and looked at Tatiana. Then she unclasped Joe's neck and reached out for Tatiana. Joe relinquished her, still feeling the trace of the warm little body pressed against hers.
"So what's your plan with your glorious free weekend?"
asked Richard.
"Ladies of leisure who lunch?"
"I don't know any ladies of leisure."
"Yummy mummies, then. Oh, well, you're not dressed for it, anyway."
He looked at her old jeans, her well-worn T-shirt and trainers.
"Gardening?"
"Painting Liddy's room. Honor's coming to stay with us for a little while."
"What, that old bat?"
oh, bat!
repeated Oscar and giggled. "She broke her hip and needs a bedroom on the ground floor until she's back on her feet."
"Rather you than me. Listen, Joe, we've got something to tell you, a date to put in your diary."
Let's go to the seaside!
commanded Oscar.
"1 minute, mate. I have to talk to your mother."
But he paused, playing with the Velcro strip on Oscar's shoe. Rip, open, close, rip. "A date?" said Joe, trying to keep the impatience out of her voice. "Are you going on holiday again?" Yet another week or two when Richard couldn't see his children.
"Well, yes, eventually."
Rip, rip,
2 weeks in the Cayman Islands, actually.
rip. The fastening was coming loose from the shoe.
But before that, we're getting married."
Joe stared at Oscar's shoe, felt like she was falling.
24th July,
said Tatiana.
it is a Sunday.
Jo gathered herself and smiled up at Richard and at Tatiana. Now she noticed the ring on Tatiana's left hand, on prominent display as she held Jo's daughter. It was a large and sparkly diamond, of course. Bigger than the stone Jo had chosen for her own ring when she'd become engaged to Richard. "Congratulations," she said. "Lovely ring, it's so pretty."
Richard asked me to marry him on my birthday in Nice,
said Tatiana. Richard had also asked Jo to marry him in April, but in Paris. "Well, happy birthday as well," Jo said. "That's great news. I'm so happy for you. Should I buy a hat?" Richard had the slight good grace to look uncomfortable.
"Well, you're invited, of course, Joe. It's all amicable, isn't it, mate? But we wanted to tell you right away because Tatiana would like Oscar as a ring-bearer and Iris as a flower girl."
My mother is making the dresses,
said Tatiana.
She is making a pink one with silver sparkles for Iris, just like a princess.
"Lovely," said Jo. "Well, of course they'll be thrilled. I'll put it in the diary."
"You don't have to come if you don't want to,"
Richard said.
"Mum's happy to look after the children."
"I'll think about it." Jo picked up the changing bag and the overnight bag she'd packed and left ready by the door and handed them to Richard, who took them with a comedy wince.
"Oof, what's this full of, rocks?"
"Wipes and nappies, mostly." Though to her knowledge Richard had never changed a single nappy in his life. Tatiana was perfectly conversant with nappies, of course. They'd be having children of their own before long, and where would Oscar and Iris be?
"We'll have them back by lunchtime tomorrow,"
said Richard. He leaned forward to give her a peck on the cheek, and she was enveloped by his aftershave. He hadn't changed it. It was the same sandalwood and lime that he'd been wearing when he'd first asked her out, the same kind she'd bought him for Christmases. That was Tatiana's job now, too. Jo kissed Oscar and Iris. "Be good for Daddy and Tatiana. Have fun."
No,
said Iris. Tatiana laughed.
she is more adorable by the day.
Richard started for the car with Oscar, and she paused.
Thank you, Jo. You are being very civilized.
"Oh, well, I just want everyone to be happy."
You are a special woman." Jo shrugged, her mouth frozen. "And you should come to wedding. My mother is also making 17 kinds of cake." 17? Fancy that. She gave Iris an extra kiss on her round cheek and breathed in the baby smell, to last her until tomorrow. She stood and waved to the car as they left, but neither Oscar nor Iris noticed, as far as she could tell. Then she allowed herself to slump and go back inside. The mirror in the hallway told her what she already knew. Her hair was scraped back, her face naked of makeup. She had a spot starting on her chin. Her T-shirt didn't quite hide the softness of her middle, the post-breastfeeding flatness of her boobs. Her jeans bagged around her backside. Was she really surprised that Richard had been attracted to the young, lithe, beautiful woman who'd been living in their attic room? "Just wait until she has children," Jo said to her reflection. But she didn't like her expression as she said it. And besides, who knew if that would even be true? Tatiana might be one of those women who kept their figure after pregnancy. Maybe Richard would spend more time at home with Tatiana and her children. Maybe they would make the perfect family, one that Richard had never been able to manage with Jo. Or maybe it had nothing to do with natural beauty at all. Maybe it was all about making an effort. Jo snorted and went off to her bedroom. 15 minutes later, she was wearing a top that had a small hole in the hem, but which fitted her properly. She was also wearing foundation, powder, blusher, eyeliner, eyeshadow, mascara and lip gloss. And though she hadn't taken the time to wash her hair, at least she'd brushed it and put it up neatly into a bun on the top of her head. She looked better. And even though no one was going to see her, why shouldn't she paint her mother-in-law's bedroom in full slap? If she wanted to, just to make herself feel good. Because it made her feel foolish. But not quite foolish enough to wash it off. She played music loud enough to shake the walls and painted Honor's room a pale blue, the colour of a washed-out sky. The colour was fresh and lovely, much prettier than the violent purple that Lydia had painted her walls when they'd moved into this house. Jo loved painting. She remembered how she'd painted every room of the tiny terraced house she and Stephen had rented when they'd moved to Brickham, so he could take up a lectureship post. Every room a different colour. Her favourite was their bedroom, a soft moss green that made her feel as if she were a cosy nesting bird. And she'd painted too when her mother passed away, in the house where she'd grown up in Cambridge. She'd scrubbed down the wood chip with sugar soap, and she'd coated everything with fresh, pure white, to chase away the memories of her mother's laboured breaths, the reality that she was no longer there to clasp Jo's hand. It was supposed to be a new beginning, as much of a new beginning as there could ever be in this life. Jo finished the first coat and surveyed her work. The purple wasn't going down without a fight. She'd need to do another coat at least. Still, the room was much brighter than it had been. It would be lovely and cheerful for Honor once it was finished. While she was waiting for the paint to dry, she made herself a cup of tea and a sandwich, deliberately not scrubbing the paint speckles from her hands first. They'd only get messy all over again. And she had no one to set a good example of hand-washing. She took her lunch outside to the back garden, where there was a sun lounger still left out from last summer. Oscar liked to bring his teddies out here on fine days and pretend to put them to bed. It was a beautiful spring day. A perfect day to go to the seaside, actually, though she hoped Richard would remember to buy sunscreen and put it on the children. With the children gone and Lydia out, she was glad she had a project to keep her busy. Spring was her least favourite season. Even now, in April, she could feel what was coming later. The visit to Adam in May that she would have to conceal from Lydia, and Honor, too, this year. The anniversary of Stephen's death in June. The sleepless nights. She'd used to love spring. Loved the world coming to life around her.
but now even the cheerful flowers and the new leaves gave her a sense of dread. After 10 years, you would think she would have learned to love spring again. Time was supposed to work magic, smooth things over, and it had been a long time. She should try to love spring again. Jo ate her sandwich and lay back, cradling her cup of tea on her stomach, letting the sunshine warm her face and arms, making herself relax. The grass needed mowing, and the beds needed weeding, and there were toys strewn everywhere waiting to be tidied away, but that wasn't Jo's job. Not today. Today she was painting, and only painting. It was so rare that she had time to do any one thing that it felt like an unbelievable luxury. It was even rarer that she had 5 minutes to sit still in the middle of the day doing nothing by herself. To listen to the birds singing in the trees, listen to the breeze rustling the leaves. The distant sound of traffic. A jet somewhere far overhead, going somewhere she did not know. She closed her eyes and willed herself to love spring again. New grass, new leaves, the birds singing, the scent of green and soil, all the life uncurling from the earth. She thought about the delight it caused in Oscar and Iris. A new beginning, like a room painted white. But could painting a room erase everything that had happened in it? A tear slid down her cheek. Nice day, isn't it? Jo sat up so quickly that her tea slopped onto her shirt. The man who had spoken was on the other side of the hedge, only about a metre away. He was leaning on something, a rake, maybe, and the sun was behind his head, caught in his curly brown hair. It took her a second to recognise him as the man that she and Sarah had ogled through the window last week.
Sorry, he said immediately. I didn't mean to startle you. Did it burn you?
Oh, no, I'm fine, thank you, sorry. Jo wiped her cheek, and then her top. The tea's gone cold, she said inanely.
Your top, though. It's stained. I'm sorry, it's my fault.
He grinned at her. One side of his mouth tilted up higher than the other, and there were smile lines in his cheeks. More like dimples, really, because he was too young to have wrinkles. He had a bit of beard stubble on his face, and it somehow made him look even younger.
If you let me know where you bought it, I'll happily replace it, he was saying. Or I can have it cleaned for you.
No, of course not. It's a really old top. I've been painting in it. She held up her paint-spattered hands to show him.
Nice colour.
He extended his hand over the hedge, and Jo scrambled up to shake hands with him. His palm was warm.
I'm Marcus, new neighbour who can't resist peering through hedges.
I'm Jo. And it's fine, absolutely fine. Lovely to meet you.
Likewise.
He didn't say anything immediately, just looked at her and smiled, and Jo's pulse hammered. Had he seen her crying? Had he seen her a few days before when she'd been watching him out of her kitchen window? His smile was open and friendly. His eyes were greyish-blue. He had some freckles on his nose from the sun.
Well,
he said. He cleared his throat.
I suppose...
When did you move in? Jo blurted out, and immediately blushed. But he didn't seem to mind. He put his hands in the back pockets of his faded jeans and said,
About a month ago? No, 3 weeks. I've never had a new house before, and I feel I should keep everything about it perfect, you know.
I know. I felt the same way when we started living here. Did you move far?
Just from the other side of town. I've got a new job and this is closer. And it's definitely a nicer neighbourhood. Have you been here long?
3 years. Nearly 4.
Seriously, how long does it take before you stop feeling guilty about leaving smudges on the skirting boards?
It depends whether or not you have children.
Ah, that makes sense.
He nodded at the clutter of toys in Jo's garden.
Are yours helping you with the painting?
They're with their father for the weekend.
Blessed peace and quiet. And I've interrupted it.
It's a pleasure.
I mean, I wouldn't know what to do with peace and quiet anyway. It gives you too much time to think.
It's a pleasure for me too,
he said quietly. And for a split second, Jo allowed herself to fantasize that this lovely young man actually meant what he said, that he was actually talking to her as an attractive woman, and not a harried, paint-spattered neighbour who really should take better care of her side of the hedge. "Well," she said, "I think it's safe for me to put a second coat on."
Happy painting. Nice talking with you, Jo.
You too. She picked up her mug from beside the sun lounger and headed back towards the house. It was ridiculous, but she swore she could feel him still looking at her. A warmth on the back of her neck.
Jo?
She turned. He was still looking at her.
If you really don't want me to replace your top that I ruined, maybe I can replace your cup of tea. Sometime.
What was this? Yes, of course. I mean, yes, that would be great. Thank you.
See you later, then.
He bent down to pick up something, and a minute later Jo heard the sound of hedge clippers. She hurried into the house. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator door. Her hair had come loose in tendrils. Her eyes were bright, and her cheeks flushed. For a moment she thought she saw someone much younger. Someone that she used to be. Chapter 11. Lydia. "Where's Daddy?" It was Oscar's voice she'd heard as she came out of her room, Oscar's little plea. But for a moment she thought it was her own. High and innocent with a childish lisp, asking the same thing. "Where's Daddy?" "Daddy's gone, darling. He's gone." Lydia ran. She rarely walked anywhere when she was alone. She liked going fast. And besides, Avril's text had sounded worried. And Mum had sounded disappointed when Lydia hadn't stayed to have a painting party with her. Like she was trying to make Lydia feel guilty for wanting to have a life of her own. And Lydia did feel guilty, a little bit, because it was true that she and Mum hardly had any time together anymore. But why did it always have to be on Mum's terms, something Mum wanted them to do? Anyway, Mum enjoyed stuff like painting. Within 5 minutes of the kids being picked up by Richard, when he got there finally, the jerk, she would be humming along with the radio in that way she had of being slightly behind the beat, and opening all the windows and twirling around with a big grin on her face because it was a beautiful day. Her mother did things like that. She made daisy chains and danced in parks. She thought eating an extra cupcake was the height of naughty fun. Lydia used to think it was really cool. Oscar and Irie still did. And they were lucky, she supposed. Mum's view of the world just didn't encompass being 16 and gay and in love with your best friend. Even in the worst times, Mum was cheerful. Smiling, looking for silver linings, trying to stay happy. She acted as if she was a rubber duck, able to bob over all the troubling things in life, saying you had to accept them and move on, when anyone could see that if Dad hadn't died, if Mum hadn't married Richard, everything would have been much better. Avril lived nearly a mile away, in an estate of 1- and 2-bedroom flats, built too close together around a courtyard of a car park about 10 years ago, and starting to wear. It was a different world to Lydia's neighbourhood, with wide lawns and high fences. Here the grass was studded with dandelions, and someone's bin had overturned into the street. Lydia skirted the spilled rubbish, which looked as if foxes or dogs had been into it, and went through the car park to Avril's block. Avril was sitting outside the door on the step. Her chin was resting on the knees of her curled-up legs, her arms around herself. She was looking out for Lydia. She looked fragile and pale, and Lydia's heart made a great thump. "What's up?" She was breathless. "I need you to..." Avril swallowed. Her voice was hoarse, and she was wearing the T-shirt she usually slept in. "I can't lift her myself." Lydia's eyes widened. Avril got up, hugging her chest now.
They went inside and up the stairs to the flat where Avril and her mum lived. Their footsteps echoed. The flat was dark, and there was a sour smell in the air. Shoes cluttered the floor of the narrow corridor leading into the flat. The curtains in the living room beyond had all been closed, but there was sunlight filtering through the open bathroom door, and in it Lydia could see something on the floor, something coming out of the doorway to the bathroom.
I found her this morning,
Avril whispered.
I don't know how long she's been there. She wasn't in when I went to bed last night.
Avril stayed, hovering near the closed front door, still hugging herself. Lydia went forward and saw, as she got closer, that the shape on the floor was a pair of feet, shoes still on. Dread pooled in her stomach. When she looked through the door of the bathroom, she saw Avril's mum lying on the tiled floor. She lay on her side, her mouth open, her face grey. A pink fluffy blanket had been draped over her and tucked beneath her body. A string of saliva dangled from her mouth and pooled on the floor near the toilet. "Oh, my God!" Lydia took a step back. "Av, is she—" Mrs. Toller answered the question Lydia couldn't ask by taking in a great shuddering breath and letting it out with a long moan.
"She's passed out,"
said Avril over Lydia's shoulder.
"I put the blanket on her because I didn't want her to get cold. But I can't leave her here and I can't lift her myself."
"Have you tried waking her up?"
"Of course I have. When I found her, she'd been sick all over the floor. I cleaned her up and put her on her side, like they said in that first aid course we did at school, yelling in her ear the whole time."
Avril's voice was high-pitched and hysterical. Lydia reached back and took her hand. It was cold.
I just need you to help me lift her up and put her into bed."
"OK. Of course. Do you think we need an ambulance?"
No ambulance. The neighbours would all see. I did that once and she—"
Avril scrunched her face together as if she were trying to stop from crying.
"Look, she's just had too much. She'll be all right in a few hours when she's slept it off."
"But what if she banged her head or hurt herself falling?" Granny Honor had broken her hip just falling down a few stairs. Older women had fragile bones, especially older women who didn't look after themselves, like Mrs. Toller. She was skinny and slack under the blanket. Lydia had never seen her eating anything. Avril often made herself a sandwich or got some crisps from the garage on the nights when she wasn't eating at Lydia's house. Lydia wasn't sure if she was supposed to know that, but she did.
"She's just drunk,"
said Avril, and now her voice was no longer hysterical. It was angry, with a brittle edge to it.
"She went to the pub and she drank too much and she came home and passed out in the bathroom. She promised she wouldn't do it, but she did. Just help me move her."
Lydia nodded. Carefully, she went into the bathroom, stepping over Mrs. Toller's legs.
"Mrs. Toller,"
she called loudly. She bent down and shook her shoulder. Mrs. Toller's eyelids fluttered, but they stayed closed, and she took in one of those shuddering breaths again and let it out with another moan. "I'll get her shoulders and you get her legs, all right?"
"OK."
Lydia pushed at Mrs. Toller's shoulder so that she was on her back, and she put her hands under her armpits. She had no idea of the best way to lift a person. That might have been on the first aid course she'd taken with Avril too, but she hadn't remembered it. All she remembered was giving CPR to a plastic dummy that smelled like stale Barbie dolls. "On 3, she said, hoping she'd be strong enough to lift Mrs. Toller, hoping they wouldn't drop her halfway to the bedroom, hoping she wouldn't puke again, hoping, though it was a betrayal of Avril, that a grown-up would walk through the door and take charge, that someone had already called an ambulance. 1, 2, 3. She heaved upwards, and Mrs. Toller was heavier than she'd expected, a dead weight. But to her surprise, she and Avril managed to lift her. Her midsection hung down, dangling the blanket just over the floor. Avril shuffled backwards into the corridor, and Lydia moved forwards, Mrs. Toller slung like a sack of potatoes between them. She moaned and muttered something.
taking you to bed, Mum, said Avril, trying to sound bright and failing, breathless. Lydia had a split second to worry that they wouldn't be able to bend Mrs. Toller's body enough to get her into the corridor, but since she was so limp, they were able to manoeuvre her by bending her at the middle. They carried her the few feet down the corridor and into her bedroom. Avril bumped open the door with her hip. Mrs. Toller was heavy enough that she'd slipped down quite a bit, so it was a struggle to lift her enough to put her on the bed, which was unmade, the duvet a tangled heap at the bottom. Lydia heaved, but her arms lacked the strength to get Mrs. Toller up. In the end, she climbed onto the bed herself, with her shoes on, taking Mrs. Toller with her, crawling backwards on her knees and sliding the woman across the bottom sheet, so that her head was more or less near the pillow. Panting, she watched Avril take off her mother's shoes and push her legs onto the bed. She pulled up the duvet over her, and Mrs. Toller groaned again, turned on her side, and curled up. The curtain was already drawn, and Avril and Lydia tiptoed out of the room. Avril went straight to the kitchen, found a large bowl and poured a glass of water, and brought them into her mother's room. Lydia waited for her in the corridor. "Are you sure it's okay?" she whispered. "Doesn't bumping your head make you throw up too? If she's got a concussion, shouldn't she go to A&E? Avril shook her head. "It's not concussion, it's gin. I checked her head for bumps, and there aren't any that I could tell. I think she just lay down and went to sleep in the bathroom. Wouldn't be the first time, though usually I can wake her up." Her face was still white, and she was beginning to shiver. Lydia put her hand on her cold arm and stroked it to warm it up. "I could call my mum," she suggested. Avril shook her head again, so hard this time that her hair nearly whipped Lydia's face. "Don't do that. I don't want your mum to know. She'll be all right. She'll just have a hangover." Avril's teeth were chattering now. Do you want a cup of tea?" Lydia asked. The question sounded like something her mum would ask. "Or something else to drink?" "I know, a Coke." Avril started for the kitchen, but Lydia stopped her. "Go and sit on the sofa. I'll bring it in." The fridge had cans of both full-fat and diet Coke in it. Lydia took the red can, because even though Avril usually drank diet, she could do with the sugar. She put some bread in the toaster too, and while it was toasting, went to get a blanket from Avril's room. She brought both to Avril, then went back to the kitchen to spread the toast thickly with butter and jam. This was also something her mum would do. Feeding. It drove her crazy sometimes. As if real problems could be solved with carbs. But Lydia couldn't think of anything else to do. Any other way to help. She brought the plate through, with another 2 cans of Coke. Avril was staring into space on the sofa, with the blanket wrapped around her. Lydia balanced the plate on the arm of the sofa next to Avril, and sat down next to her, popping her own can. "She just had one too many in the pub," said Avril. It was more than that. Lydia heard the pain in her friend's voice. All the other times that Avril had never told her about, all the times that Avril had had to deal with by herself, and she wanted to hug her, kiss her, hold her close, curl around and into her, surround her, kiss her forehead, her eyebrows, her cheek, stroke her hair and tell her it didn't matter. She loved her. She would look after her. That the two of them could be happy. They didn't need anyone else. "What can I do?" she asked helplessly. "Just stay here. Can you hang out for a while? I don't want to leave her, and I don't want to be by myself." "Yeah." Avril reached for the remote and turned the telly on. They sat there side by side, in the blue light, looking at the television without seeing it. Lydia felt every breath Avril took. Slowly, minute by minute, she felt her shivering subside and her body quieten. She could not reach out her hand. What felt like much later, after Avril's mum had woken up and slumped into the kitchen, feet dragging to put the kettle on, Lydia went home. She was astonished by the sunshine. At home,
The entire downstairs smelled of paint. In what used to be Lydia's bedroom, Mum was reaching up, rolling a second coat of light blue paint on the walls. The purple underneath still showed through in patches. She turned around when Lydia entered, putting her free hand on the small of her back. "Oh, hello," she said. "Is Avril with you?" Lydia saw that Mum's cheeks were flushed. She appeared to be wearing makeup, though she was wearing a lot of paint on her face and hair as well. The top of her chest was pink, and her eyes bright, as if Lydia had caught her doing something naughty instead of putting a second coat of paint on the walls. She looked younger and prettier, more like the Mum she remembered of a long time ago, when Lydia was little, when they'd done all those things together, when Dad was still alive. She was the Mum who fed her, who bought her Disney DVDs, who insisted on painting the toenails on both of their feet pink, and who loved to fly kites and dance in fields, who always told her things were going to be all right, when Lydia was young enough to believe her. All in a rush, Lydia wanted to go across the room and snuggle up into her mother's arms. She wanted to tuck her head under Mum's chin and let her stroke her back and make there noises, like she used to when Lydia had a bad dream in the middle of the night. But that would require explanation. It had been too long, and she knew that it wouldn't change anything. Not really. Instead, she picked up a paintbrush. "Where do you need help?" Mum's eyes widened in surprise. "Well, if you wanted to go along the skirting boards for a second coat, that would be great." "Thank you." Lydia nodded, and the two of them worked together in silence for a while. It wasn't a painting party, but it was sort of peaceful. Chapter 12. Joe. Lydia was plugged into her phone, staring out through the windscreen as they negotiated the North Circular on the way to the hospital. Above the sound of the car engine, Joe could hear the flimsy drum and bass sound escaping through the headphones. It was as if yesterday hadn't happened. Not that they'd said much to each other yesterday. Sometimes it was like living with a stranger. She reached over and tapped Lydia on the arm. Liddy sighed and took one of her earbuds out. "What?" "I thought maybe we could have a chat while we were driving to get Granny on her." Lydia sighed again and took the other earbud out. "We don't seem to spend much time together these days," said Joe. "When you were little, we spent every day together." "Well, I have a life now, you know." "I know. And it's natural that you're growing up. And I'm really busy too, with your brother and sister. I'm sorry that I don't have as much time for you as I used to." Joe waited, hoping for some response, an apology in kind, but Lydia only fiddled with her phone. "How's school?" She shrugged. "Are you worried about your exams?" "Not that you should be. You're a very clever girl. But I know they put the pressure on these days." "It's okay." "I thought we could work on a revision timetable together, you know, with coloured pens and stickers, with treats built in so that you have something to aim for. That would be fun, wouldn't it?" Lydia stared out of the window. She was losing her. Her little girl, her firstborn, was slipping away all the time. Joe couldn't gather her up into her arms any more. Couldn't tickle her until she laughed so hard she was squealing. Couldn't play dress-up and paint her nails. Couldn't make it better with biscuits and warm milk. Couldn't tuck her into bed and kiss her on the forehead. When she was little, Lydia would laugh easily. And cry easily, too. Her emotions were so clear on her face. She was soft-hearted and tender. When she was 7, a skinny little girl with no father, she'd saved up all of her pocket money and asked Joe to donate it to the plaque they were putting up on the bridge for Stephen. Lydia's phone played a musical note, the special note she had for texts from Avril. Joe heard it all over the house at least 20 times a day. Lydia read the message and stuffed the phone into her pocket. When Joe glanced at her, her face was screwed up,
as if she'd just received some sort of a blow. "Liddy, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Was it some bad news from Avril? She couldn't look at Lydia properly because she was driving, couldn't study her face for pain or evasion. "Avril's fine," said Lydia, but her voice was angry. Jo swallowed her questions and tried to concentrate on her driving and on giving her daughter some space. The Range Rover was much too big for driving around London. It was much too big in general. Jo felt silly driving around so tall, as if she were looking down on everyone else. Richard had bought it, as Richard had bought everything. "How did you know that Dad was in love with you?" Lydia said abruptly. Jo signalled left and negotiated the bend before she answered. "I knew from the very beginning. You know the story, right? How I was working in that cafe in Cambridge to save up some money so I could go to uni. And how he came in every day with all these big thick books to study and drink tea, and how he never even looked up from his books for the first 3 weeks, and then suddenly one day he did." Jo smiled, pleased that Lydia was talking at last. "I look forward to him coming in every day. I even had a cup ready for him, and I would save him one of his favourite scones, even though he never noticed that I did it. You probably don't remember the way he had of being so fully absorbed in what he was thinking of that it was as if nothing else existed. I thought he was adorable. He needed a haircut. When he was tall and gangly and he wore glasses, he looked like a young mad professor." Jo grinned. "The other girls in the cafe teased me that I was falling for a nerd." "You used that word back then? Nerd?" "Not everything was invented by your generation, Liddy. Anyway, one day he looked up when I brought him his tea. I don't know why he did so that day. He told me later that he'd had a feeling that something important was going to happen, from the moment he'd woken up that morning. I put his cup of tea and his scone down on the table, and he looked up from his book, and our eyes met. And it was exactly as it's described in the books." Lydia said it like the often repeated phrase that it was. They had gone through this story many times before. The story of the moment when her mother and her father had fallen in love. "It was," Jo said. "Exactly. He had the most beautiful hazel eyes. Just the same colour as yours, Lydia. We stood there staring at each other in that cafe for what felt like forever. But I suppose it was only a few seconds. I don't think I breathed for the entire time. And then he cleared his throat and asked me if we could see each other after I finished work. And the rest is history. Instead of going to uni, I married him, and then you came along. But how did you know he loved you? I mean, how did you know?" "Your father had a wonderful gift of concentration," said Jo. "I'd seen it already with the way he studied his books, which was part of why I was attracted to him, I think. But it wasn't just physics. When he loved something, or someone, he threw himself wholly into his feelings. I never doubted that he loved me. It was in everything he said, everything he did. The way he touched me and looked at me. And, you know, he shouldn't have fallen in love with me. He was about to get a first in physics at Cambridge. He had a brilliant career in front of him, and I was a waitress in a cafe with no university education. But your dad didn't care about any of that. He loved me, and that was enough for him. He was exactly the same way with you when you were born. You were his world. If it was like that, why did you settle for someone like Richard? Doesn't that cheapen what you had?" "My marriage to Richard wasn't the same as my marriage to your dad," said Jo carefully. "And it didn't end well, but that doesn't mean it was cheap. We have Oscar and Iris now. I wouldn't change anything for the world if it meant losing them. Just like how I wouldn't change a thing that happened with your dad, even though we lost him. All the pain was worth it, because of the good things, because I loved him." "But you didn't love Richard." "Why do you say that?" Lydia let out a huff of exasperation. "All that stuff you just said. Richard never treated you that way. And you were never happy with him, not really. Lydia, when you're grown up, you'll realise that there are lots of different kinds of bullshit. Jo blinked. Pardon? Bullshit? There's only one kind of love, and that's the kind of love that you feel forever. Even if you can't have it, you still feel it. You never let the person you love go, and you never stop missing them. She was so vehement that Jo risked a glance at her, even though the traffic was getting heavier. Yes, she said, you're right. You deserve honesty. I married Richard because he seemed steady. It wasn't easy, Lydia. Working full-time as a single mother, he seemed like a good choice. I thought he would look after us. And I cared for him. I really did care for him. But you didn't love him. He swept me off my feet. You know what Richard is like. I thought at the time that it was the right thing to do. And it was springtime. Springtime, and I didn't want to remember. I wanted something else to think about when I lay awake at night. I thought it was right, she said again, hearing the weakness in her own voice. Don't do it again, Mum. Don't go with some guy just because he's good-looking and you fancy him and because you think it might be a good idea, or because you need a man to make you feel better about yourself. Jo gripped the steering wheel and tried to ignore the insult. She tried to hear what Lydia was really saying, underneath the accusations and the anger. The hurt and what had caused it. Is that what you felt it was when I married Richard? Did you feel that I was betraying your father? Just don't. Don't. Please. All right. Promise me. Lydia leaned forward in her seat, straining against the seatbelt, her arm braced against the dashboard, trying to look into her mother's face. Full of the same intensity that her father used to have, the same hazel eyes. Promise me you won't. I promise. When they arrived at the hospital, Honor was sitting in a chair next to the main entrance, her belongings beside her in a neat pile. "Hello," said Jo, as usual wondering whether she should offer to shake hands or kiss, and deciding on neither. "I hope you haven't been waiting long." Honor only shrugged, which Jo took as meaning that, yes, she'd been waiting for ages. She stood up by herself and walked slowly with her cane out of the sliding doors towards the car, which Jo had left on double yellow lines, hazard lights flashing, with Lydia in the back seat to guard it. After their conversation, with that oddly intense bit, Lydia had plugged herself back into her phone and put her music back on, as if she'd said all she intended to say and now the topic was closed. And Jo hadn't pushed it, too busy concentrating on the directions from the sat-nav. "Looks as if you're getting on well with that cane," Jo said, opening the car door for her. "Irritating thing." Honor handed Jo the cane. She winced, and Jo hurried to take her arm. "Let me help you up into the car." She supported Honor's arm, kept her steady as she stepped up into the Range Rover. Honor let out a little huff of breath as she pulled herself up, which was her only betrayal of pain. "Can I help you with—" "I can buckle a seatbelt," snapped Honor. Though by the time Jo had put Honor's belongings in the boot, then come round to her own side of the car, Honor was only just clicking the belt closed. She stared ahead through the windscreen, her face unsmiling. Lydia had greeted her grandmother when she'd climbed in, but now she was firmly plugged back into her headphones. "Well," Jo said cheerfully, "let's get going." Honor said little as they drove. Jo tried asking about the hospital food, and the doctors and nurses she'd met, about Honor's physical therapy sessions, but it was as hard as trying small talk with Lydia, so she gave up and listened to the sat-nav's pleasant voice instead. She pulled up on the double yellow lines in front of Honor's house and put on the hazard lights again. "I'll just write a little note for the windscreen, and hopefully we won't get a ticket," she said, and then looked at Honor, whose face was inscrutable. "It must be good to see your house again." "For the last time in a while," Honor said sourly, and unbuckled herself. She got out of the car more easily than she got in, by sort of sliding off the seat. She stood on the pavement, looking up at the flight of stairs to her front door.
To Jo, it looked more or less like Everest.
So we can help you up these, no problem. Right, Liddy?
Lydia, who had at last taken her earphones out, nodded.
I can climb these stairs. I don't need help. But we're happy to...
Honor turned to Jo.
This is all going to work out a lot better, she said, if you stop offering me help. If I need help, I will ask for it.
It felt like a slap.
Oh, well. All right, then. That is good to know. How about Lydia stays here to keep you company, and I'll go on ahead and put the kettle on?
She flew up the stairs, opened the door, and retreated to the kitchen. It was probably unfair to leave Lydia in charge of Honor, but Jo felt a sharp reply hovering on her tongue, and she knew she couldn't. They had to get off on the right foot. They had to. Honor was an old lady, in a lot of pain, facing a lot of changes. She was bound to be tetchy for a while. She has been tetchy since I've known her.
End of CD 3.